We're just over 3 minutes away, so get ready for an amazing session 3 of the Emotional Intelligence Online Summit. Welcome, and I'd love you to pop in the chat box where it is that you're calling in from and what time is it for you? And we're live. Welcome to day 2 of the Emotional Intelligence Online Summit for 2020. My name is Grant Herbert, and I am your host again today for this amazing time together. We have a lineup of speakers today that are going to knock your socks off. Hopefully that translates around the world as to what that means. But basically what I'm saying is they're going to give you a wow experience. Yesterday was a brilliant day. We had speakers from all around the world who just served at such a high level. It was a phenomenal time. The feedback has been amazing. The interaction was fantastic. And with that in mind, what I'd love you to do right now is jump into the chat box and let me know where you're calling in from. I'm just going to read a few of those now that have already started. So we've got Natasha from Queensland in Australia. We've got Barbara from Chicago, Illinois. It's 4 p.m. there. Yeah, let me know what time it is for you as well. I enjoyed yesterday and came back for more. That's always good. When someone comes back, that tells you that you are perhaps doing something that's worthy of doing again. Denise, great to see you back again from Toowoomba, and it's 6:58 when she typed that in, because Queensland is stubborn and won't do daylight savings time. All right, I'm not going to get into that right now. I agree with you. All right, we've got Swandi. Again, great to see you from Nigeria, and it's 10 p.m. there. What commitment. Love that. Ivana from Zagreb. Good vibrations. Thank you so much. Good to see you here. We've got Yasmin from Melbourne in Australia. And she says she's back like a boomerang. Keep putting them in there. So today is going to be much more of the same. And I don't mean that in a way that it's just going to be the same as yesterday. We have another amazing lineup of speakers. One of those is in the waiting room right now. And I'm going to be bringing him on shortly. And I'm really, really excited to be hearing from him. Yesterday, we started off the day. And if you haven't, by the way, watched the recordings of those, you can do that. We started off the day by bringing my mentor. Well, we started the day with me, and I gave you a little bit of an overview of how People Builders came about and how my emotional intelligence passion was ignited, and how I went from being someone in military and corporate who had no emotional intelligence or idea of what it even was, to then now I get to work all around the world, not just training and coaching and mentoring people in social and emotional intelligence, but also certifying and developing the next generation of trainers, coaches, and speakers in that field as well. So if you want to have a list of that journey, you can go back and you can do that. We then had my mentor and the person who introduced me to this wonderful field of study and lifestyle, Dr. Laura Belston, and she talked about the genesis of emotional intelligence and where she sees it going in the future. We then had Dr. Suzanne Knowles, who is a positive psychology, she has a Ph.D. in positive psychology coaching, and she helped us to understand how we could use positive psychology to coach ourselves and others to be able to navigate any circumstances in our life. And that was an amazing morning session. We then went into our afternoon session here, where we had some technical difficulties to start with, which is always good. So we did a bit of a switcheroo, and we had Kareen Buri from Dubai, who helped us to understand about the science of empathy. And empathy is so important in our world right now, as it is in all parts of time. And then we had Ivana Stulic from Croatia. I'm really hoping I said that name correctly. And she just empowered us in being able to look after ourselves at this time, and gave us some positive psychology and some actual things to do with that to help us to maintain that level where we need it to. And we then finished off with the brilliant Jill McKay from the United Kingdom, and she helped us to understand how to apply the understandings of neuroscience in our life, and talked about the science and the practice of motivation. So go back, make sure you have a look at those. They're going to be up for about 7 days. And if you've got friends who want to see them, give them the link to register as well so that they can have a look as well. All right. Today is another day. What I want you to do is make sure that you interact. Now, I know some people have had challenges because of YouTube, the way they set it up. You've got to have your own account and all those things to be able to chat. And I appreciate that. It's a learning for me. So if you can, please get into the chat box. Keep your questions till we get towards the end of the presentation and I'll call for questions. That way they'll all be together and I won't have to go searching for them. I'm going to have breaks, 5-minute breaks here and there so that you can stretch, go to the bathroom, etc. But right now, I want to kick it off and get started. I am so excited to bring this first speaker to you. His name is Robert Mack. Robert is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and author. He studied under the direction of Martin Seligman himself, the founder of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. Robert is one of the world's leading experts on the relationships between happiness and success. He helps individuals and organizations achieve an energizing balance of authentic personal happiness and effortless professional success based on time-tested, face-valid, empirical data and timeless transcendental wisdom. Robert's work has been endorsed by Oprah, Vanessa Williams, and many others, and he has been a regularly featured guest expert on Good Morning America, The Today Show, Access Hollywood, E! Networks, OWN, KTLA, and in magazines like GQ, Self, Health, Cosmopolitan, and Glamour. You can see why I'm excited to bring him to you. Robert's first book, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, is celebrity endorsed and critically acclaimed. Robert coaches individuals from all walks of life, including professional athletes, popular entertainers, senior executives, and everyday people, and consults with organizations of all kinds. And today, he's given of himself to come and to coach you. So get ready. As I bring him to you now, let's give him a big hand as we welcome Robert Mack. Come on in, Robert.
Yes. Oh, so amazing, Grant. I need to come here every single day just to get that kind of warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm so deeply grateful to be a part of this incredible event. You know, I don't know what anybody else's childhood was like, but I know there was one question that I had at that age and that I had for everybody here today, and that is, why are you here? And by that, I don't mean why you're here at the summit. I know that Grant and the rest of us dragged you here screaming and shouting, but why are you here on the planet? And that was a difficult question that I grappled with beginning as early as like 7 or 8 years of age. And I would drive my mom nuts with that question, just crazy with that question. I was probably the unhappiest, most deeply dysphoric kid I'd ever known. And it started at a very young age. And I always thought I would grow out of that unhappiness. I thought, oh, eventually, if I do well enough academically, I do well enough athletically, maybe I'll have a girlfriend and I'll go on maybe to make good money. I will grow out of my unhappiness. But that did not happen, at least not right away. Instead, that unhappiness grew into dysphoria, and that dysphoria grew into learned helplessness, and that slipped slowly but surely into an experience of deep depression and suicidal ideation. So despite doing really well, I was salutatorian of my high school class, but being extraordinarily anxious and stressed out and self-loathing, I did not get happier as things got better in my life. I only became less and less happy. And so I eventually got to a point where I was so deeply depressed and hated myself so much that I began to contemplate, and more than that, I began to research ways to kill myself, right? So, you know, the one thing about being depressed and unhappy is that you're in so much pain that even when it comes to ending your life, you still want to avoid as much pain as possible. And so I went online, I looked for the least painful way I could find to kill myself. And as I began doing some research, I decided I was going to slash my wrist. And so after some thought, I went to the kitchen and I just picked up the first steak knife I could find, and I began to dig that steak knife into my wrist. And you can't see it probably in the screen, but I still have the suicide test marks on my wrist. I wanted so badly to be over with the pain that I was willing to not just contemplate, not just research, but to actually take my own life. And interesting, unpredictably, something very strange happened in that moment that I began to dig this knife into my wrist. And that is that for no good reason and without any real change in my external life circumstances or conditions, I felt a level of peace and well-being and indescribable bliss even and limitless love that I just simply couldn't put words to, right? And so at that particular moment, I decided that I would postpone my suicide. So look, here's the funny thing about it is that when you're in that state, and even when you're experiencing this kind of subjective well-being that I've always wished for my whole life, that I had worked so hard to experience through sports, basketball, football, cross country, baseball, through academics, through friends, which I didn't have a whole lot of. I was most shy of my high school class, right? So despite me trying so hard to achieve, accomplish, and acquire things that I thought would lead to an experience of happiness and peace and self-love, I never ever felt it until I had this suicidal moment, right? And so as I decided to postpone the suicide, honestly, I didn't commit to more than an hour. And I know now looking back 20 years later, I think, man, an hour is nothing. An hour just blows by. But at that time, it felt like forever. And quite frankly, I wasn't even committed to the entire hour. But in that hour, I began doing some research. And that hour bled into several hours, which bled into several days. And now, again, 2 decades later, I barely, if at all, recognize that young man who was so seriously suicidal and so deeply unhappy. And I don't think that young man would recognize me, right? And so today I want to share just a little bit of what I've gleaned, both from my own personal experience, okay, but also from the world of positive psychology. And as you all know, positive psychology is really the study and science of what makes life worth living. And it's also the way I think it's a study and science of how to experience increasingly effortless success and authentic success through happiness. And so that's where I want to start today, is sort of with this idea. And the one thing I've discovered in asking myself this question, what is your life for? When you really think about that question, you just sit with it for a second. It's such an important question. I think very rarely are we invited into a conversation, even with ourselves, around that question. But the one thing that I feel very certain about these days is that my life is for happiness. So no matter what it is I'm trying to achieve, accomplish, or acquire in my life, at the end of the day, the main reason that I want it is because I want or expect to feel happier as a result of having achieved, accomplished, or acquired it, right? And I would argue that's true for all of us. You might not call it happiness, you might call it success, you might call it wealth, you might call it health, contentment, fulfillment. There are lots of words we can use for it, but at the end of the day, we're wanting a lasting, meaningful, and abiding experience of what I simply call happiness, right? And so the first point that I want to sort of drive home to all of us today is that happiness is the greatest success because it's what all success strives for. It's the highest wisdom because it's what all wisdom ultimately aims at, right? It's the highest health because it's what ultimately health really mostly deeply desires, right? So at any time in your life that you're trying to achieve, accomplish, or acquire something, you mostly want it because at the end of the day, you're hoping to feel better as a result of it. So that's the first point, is that happiness is the greatest success. More than that, happiness isn't only the greatest success, it also leads to success, right? And I want to always dive in there right away. But first, I want to disabuse us of some of these ideas that I think we're pretty clear about, but I think science helps to flesh it out, which is this idea that success, by and large, does not lead to happiness, right? So while happiness is the greatest success, success does not lead largely to happiness. And we know that because all of the traditional measures of success generally don't make people lastingly, meaningfully, and abidingly better off, right? So the first thing most of us think is, of course, money. And we all are pretty clear about that. I think that for the most part, if you're making above a level of subsistence, that here in the United States means about $75,000, additional dollars don't mean a whole lot. So you get less and less bang for your buck with each additional dollar over about $75,000. We call that the diminishing marginal utility of the dollar. And at some point you plateau, right? And so by and large, if you're not able to pay your basic necessities, okay, you don't have a roof over your head, you don't have clean water, money matters a great deal. But once you hit that point, it doesn't matter a whole lot. Well, we've let money go as a sort of hope and guarantee that it will allow us to experience the kind of happiness that we're after. Well, what about health? I think most of us think, well, certainly we're all happier and I feel much better and I feel like I have a much better shot at being happy if I'm healthy. And that is understandable and true to some extent, but by and large, health, believe it or not, is not highly correlated with happiness, right? That being healthy isn't highly correlated with being happy, right? Now, that being said, while objective health isn't highly correlated with being healthy or happy, subjective health is. So your perception of your health is highly correlated with happiness, right? So what else does not lead to happiness? So I think most of us would assume, well, certainly, loving relationships do. And there's some evidence there, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we sometimes go further than that and we say, well, boy, getting married, having kids, that's definitely a goal and a dream of mine. And why should it not be? And I'll give you a couple of reasons why it may not be the end all be all. And I think most of us are aware of this, but when you get married, the first, few months, that honeymoon phase, you get a bit of a bump in your happiness level. And it's not statistically significant. And it doesn't last for particularly long. And before long, you're actually returning to your baseline level of happiness. And so marriage generally doesn't lead to lasting, meaningful, and abiding happiness. The happiest relationships often consist of two independently happy people, right? What about kids? Well, all of us love our kids, and most of us wouldn't trade our kids in for the world, right? We just love our kids. We would die for our kids. We would live for our kids. And interestingly enough, kids are a little bit of a mixed bag, right, when it comes to happiness. And ultimately, the first kid actually causes a dip in your happiness score. Parents, I know, I'm so sorry to share that with you, but it causes a dip in your happiness score. And the second kid, on average, causes a statistically significant dip in your happiness level. And your happiness doesn't return to its baseline level until those kids leave the house, right? I mean, it's mind-blowing when you think about that. But any of us with kids are crystal clear about that. It's not that we don't love our kids. It's not that they're not incredible sources of joy. I mean, we call them bundles of joy, right? But ultimately, our kids come with a lot of stress and a lot of worry and a lot of responsibilities, and they're expensive, okay? And that's a testament to how much we value them, right? But that stress and that anxiety and that worry and those responsibilities can weigh very heavily on you. And it can, in some ways, compromise your happiness, right? So not kids, not health, not wealth, not marriage, right? And so by and large, these things don't matter. What about getting older? Well, we do know that as you get older, you actually tend to get happier, believe it or not. You experience fewer highs, fewer lows, and generally continue to trend upward. So age actually works in the reverse way that most of us think about it. Most of us think of those old grumpy people, but that's just simply not the case. Most folks get older because they're somewhat more emotionally regulated as they get older, right? So not health, not wealth, not marriage, not kids, not age, right? So then the question becomes, not only is happiness the greatest success, and not only does success not lead to happiness, but in addition to that, happiness is or does lead to increasingly authentic and effortless success. So what do we mean by that? We mean, at the end of the day, happiness improves your life outcomes, your circumstance conditions in practically all and every way, right? And so let's provide a little evidence. So in terms of wealth, we do know that folks who are happy first without all the money tend to attract the money more easily, more quickly, more efficiently, effectively, and more efficaciously. And happy people make about $600,000 to $700,000 more over the course of their entire lifetime on average than unhappy people, right? We also know that happy people live longer. They live 67 years longer. In one study, they lived 11 years longer, right? So they live longer. They experience better health. They experience less job burnout. More than that, if you care about love, you definitely want to care about happiness, because happy people tend to get married earlier, stay married longer, and are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not. We know, of course, it's not about marriage. It's about love and it's about happiness, right? And so at the end of the day, if you care about health, wealth, job performance, you care about marriage, you care about any of these things, you're definitely going to want to prioritize happiness, because in some ways, it's this cleaner, more efficient, and effective fuel that leads us to increasingly effortless and authentic success in all areas of our life, right? And so happiness isn't only the greatest success, it also leads to success, to traditional forms of success, right? And so let's talk about this for a second, because there's a formula that scientists have put together. It's a happiness formula of sorts. And most of us think, again, and as much as we try to attest to the opposite of this, most of us live our lives in ways that actually would seem to suggest that we're mostly seeking happiness through middlemen, middle women, middle things. We're routing it through success, and we're routing it through life outcomes and life circumstances and conditions, right? And of course, that's the long, scenic route to happiness. And instead of doing that, you want to sort of go directly to the source for your happiness, right? So science has found, they put together a formula, and the formula essentially is that happiness equals C plus S plus V, right? So what is C? C is what we mostly think about when we think about living the good life, right? We just want to live that good life. And that good life, you can imagine having infinite money, as much money as you can possibly imagine having it. Imagine the perfect health, perfect body. Imagine looking just the way you want to look. Imagine having the perfect friends, the perfect relationship, having the perfect kids or no kids, whatever you prefer. Imagine all of that. All of that together only accounts for about 10% of how happy you are. 10%, right? So I don't know about you guys, but if I go to Nordstrom or I go some other retail store and I get 10% off of something, it doesn't really change my life. I like it, I appreciate it, but I certainly don't spend my life trying to get 10% off consistently, right? I don't spend most of my time, energy, and resources on just trying to get this 10%. Instead, I focus on the other 90%. Now, 50% of happiness, as we know, is genetic, right? So we come born with genetic predisposition for happiness. So some of us are born a little happier, a little less happy. The interesting thing about genetic disposition or predisposition is that it's perfectly malleable, plastic, and changeable. So unlike height or eye color, it's something you can do a whole lot about, right? So that 50%, changeable, controllable, plastic. 40% is voluntary stuff, right? So this is the traditional things you think about when you think about the world of positive psychology, lots of self-help stuff, but gratitude and counting your blessings, relationships matter a great deal, taking care of your health, so exercising and eating well and sleeping and all those things, really, the voluntary things fall into this 40% bucket, I'd argue 90% bucket, right? And so at the end of the day, the one thing I've discovered through happiness and through my experience with both my clients and my own life is that yes, happiness is the greatest success, no question about it. Second, not only is it the greatest success, it leads to success, increasing success in all areas of your life. And you get to do it the painless way or the less painful way, right? Third, the things that you think lead to happiness generally don't. And these other things, these voluntary things do, right? Now I want to offer one more caveat before we sort of dive a little more deeply into sort of tips, tricks, and tools for living your happiest life possible. And that is this idea that happiness is selfish. So I know growing up, I struggle with this, man. I really struggled. I thought that being happy was an extremely or an extraordinarily selfish pursuit and endeavor. And I have found to see the error of my ways. Based on lots of empirical data, we know that the happiest people are the most loving, generous, and charitable people on the planet. That interestingly enough, happy people donate more money, more blood, more time. They're kinder, they're more altruistic, they're less selfish, actually. And that being said, there's this positive feedback loop, which means that when you also take any of those actions, right, you donate energy, you get outside of yourself sometimes and do things for other people, that also increases your happiness. And so there's this incredible positive upward spiral when it comes to happiness and it comes to generosity or being loving. And so the way I put that is this, that happy people are the best lovers, no question about it, because they're the most loving, but also the most loving people, the greatest lovers, are also the happiest, right? And so kind of keep that in mind. One piece of additional data I just want to share with folks there. I often say, and I think lots of us do, that happiness is attractive. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, right? So literally, we've seen the ways, or figuratively, we've seen the ways in which it's attractive. It attracts greater success, better health, longevity, relationships, all the good things, right? And there have also been tons of studies that have shown that happy people are rated as physically more attractive. Now hear that right, because often the way we hear it is, if I can just become more attractive, I'll be happier. But it actually doesn't work that way. If you can get happy without necessarily being as attractive as you think you are, people will see you and perceive you and experience you as much more attractive, right? So they show people a picture of you when you're not particularly happy, and then they show people a picture of you when you've got an authentic Duchenne smile, and boom, everybody says, man, that picture of that guy or that woman smiling, that's just, a really attractive person, or a much more attractive person than the alternative, okay? So I'm gonna stop there for a minute, but I want to just sort of summarize what I said there, which is at the end of the day, your happiness is your gift to the world, right? It's not something that is a selfish endeavor that only benefits you. And I would argue that your happiness is really not just something that's bestowed upon or given to you. It's something that you are almost obligated to share with the world, right? So when you hold on to your happiness and you enjoy it for yourself, for its own sake, we call it happiness. So when it's ingoing, I call it happiness. When it's outgoing, when you become like this rain cloud and you fill yourself up with so much love and peace and joy that you simply can't contain it anymore, and you have to rain down on the entire planet and all the living creatures on the planet in an indiscriminate fashion without an expectation of reciprocity, that peace and that love and that joy, simply to unburden yourself, simply to relieve yourself, that's when I call it love, right? So happiness and love look like two separate energies or two different phenomena, but really it's one energy appearing in two different ways, right? When it's focused on you, we call it happiness. When it's an unburdening and a relieving of the happiness because it's so much you just can't help but share it with other people, and you do it contagiously in an infectious fashion, then we can call it love, right? But it doesn't come with this quid pro quo sort of fashion. So I want to share a story real quick just to illustrate that point, and then I'll dive into a couple quick tips and tricks around how to become happier with the least amount of time, energy, and effort humanly possible, so that you can experience the most success humanly possible. I did a morning show for 3 years in LA right before the pandemic, and it was focused on positivity and inspiration, okay? And sometimes we'd have celebrity folks come on there, sometimes we'd have athletes, sometimes we'd have everyday people come on the show. And I loved doing this show. It was so much fun. And every day after the show, we had to kind of take care of our own wardrobe. So I would go to the mall or whatever next door between or before my clients. One day I am walking back. I had just gone into a store, I had bought something, I was walking out of the store, and this guy, he was probably in his mid-50s. He said, hey, man, you got a second? I want to say something to you real quick. And I'm like, yeah, I got a second for you. And he says, oh, I just want to, really express some appreciation. I love what you're wearing, man. I just love this look. And where'd you get this look from? And I think, oh man, that's so nice. So, grateful for you sharing such kind words with me. And I said, oh, I got it here and there. And he said, oh, what do you do? Why are you dressed always in a blazer or whatever? I've seen you a couple times before. And I said, oh, I do this morning show or whatever. And he said, oh yeah, that sounds really fun. And I said, yeah. He said, you seem like a happy guy. And I said, oh, wasn't always that way, brother. Wasn't always that way. So as I'm having this conversation with this guy, there is a boy. He's a young man, probably about 22, 23 years old. And I see him out of the corner of my eyes, and he's with this older gentleman. And all of a sudden, as I'm beginning to share my story about being so deeply unhappy and suicidal for so long, and I was unhappy and suicidal for so long, as I start to share the story, just because I couldn't help but share it, and the guy seemed interested, I feel this young man that quite frankly looked like a younger version of me, so very good looking is what I mean by that. Just joking. But I was standing there, right? And I suddenly feel the energy shift, and all of a sudden he's just crying, and there's just tears and tears and tears and tears. And I'm so concerned because I think I've said something to insult this guy or offend him or making him upset, in some way. And so the first thing I say is, oh my goodness, are you okay? Did I say something to hurt your feelings or to upset you? And he can't barely catch his breath. He can't barely collect himself, but he says, Rob, today, man, today was the day I was going to kill myself. Today, literally today was the day I was going to kill myself. Right. And I'm looking at this kid, man, and I couldn't help but get emotional because it was like, that wasn't that long ago. That was me. I was that kid, and I didn't have the courage, nor the transparency, nor the insight or awareness to share what I was feeling in the way that this kid had. So as he says this, he says, and now, Rob, this is like a sign for me, man. I'm not gonna kill myself, man. I'm not gonna do it. I mean, I know now. I know and I'm thinking, my goodness gracious, how unbelievably serendipitous and synchronistic this is, right? And I say that to say to all of you today that no matter what you're feeling, what you're going through, no matter what the challenges are in your life, first of all, there have been people and there are people that have dedicated their entire lives, blood, sweat, and tears to solve for the one problem you're solving for, or trying to solve for, okay? And they would love nothing more than to support you in getting through it and getting through it as quickly and as effectively as humanly possible, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is this: your happiness is your gift to the world, and you don't know the ways in which it affects and has a ripple effect on the entire world, more contagious than anything on the entire planet, including this virus and any other virus that comes after it, is emotion. We know that. You can catch emotion through a text message. You can catch an emotion through a post, through a comment, through a glance. You can catch an emotion through a thought, okay? So understand and appreciate this point, and that is that your life itself is extraordinarily short, it's extraordinarily long, particularly if you're unhappy. This happiness thing is not only good because it feels good, it's also good for you. It also helps you do good in the world, and it also helps other people feel good, and it helps them do good in the world, right? And so if you want the cheat code or a master key to sort of diving right in and getting as happy as humanly possible, I would encourage you, don't wait, don't procrastinate, don't postpone. I'm going to share a couple quick tips and tricks to that end, okay? So the way I describe this, and all my positive psychology scientists and researcher friends out there, please, offer me just a little grace here, because I'm going to try to reduce it down to something that is immediately actionable and practical. And I'll probably use different language than maybe we would in traditional psych class. But essentially, at the beginning of your happiness journey, it's all about happiness being what you do, okay? And so there's a lot of focus on that, and it deserves a lot of focus. And so one of the things you could do right now is create for yourself a happiness islands list. What is a happiness islands list? It's people, places, things, activities that with very little time, energy, and effort allow you to feel uplifted, excited, and inspired, just happy to be alive, okay? So that's the first piece, okay? Happiness islands, okay? Now, the other place we get to, particularly the beginning of our happiness journey, is that happiness isn't just what you do. Happiness is also who you spend time with. And that is just as true as anything I could possibly say today. What you'll want to do there is you want to get crystal clear about who does and who doesn't add or contribute to your happiness in some way, okay? They don't necessarily have to be happy themselves, but they certainly have to want you to be happy, okay? And so you want to do everything you possibly can to put yourself in the company of people who are happy, or at least aspiring to be happy, right? Or put yourself in the company of people who you can help be happier, right? But there has to be a common ground there. And so that's the second piece. But I would argue that happiness isn't, in the end, just or mostly what you do. And it's certainly not what or who you spend your time with only. It's also what you think, right? And so when we talk about positive psychology research and science, we talk a lot about optimism and resilience and grit and growth mindset, right? And we also talk about gratitude, and we talk about savoring. But at the end of the day, all of these things really are about happy thoughts, right? And so the way I describe it in a very simple fashion is you want to begin telling a better feeling story about everything and everybody in your life based in truth until it becomes a habit. You want to be religious about that. You want to be vigilant about that. It's got to be based in truth, though, and that's critical. A lot of us want to, make this a snow job. It can't be a snow job. So let me give you a perfect example of that. In the beginning of my happiness path and journey, I would simply start conversations with my favorite part about that was. It could be the worst experience, but my favorite part about that, or if I'm in a conversation with somebody else, you always want to meet them where they are and say, gosh, I will say that the best part of that entire experience is this, right? So these are little pivots, right? So you start to focus on what your favorite part is, the best part is. Another example is anytime, every stick is really, there's two ends to it, right? And so when you begin to tell a better feeling story based in truth, you're really doing simple things like this. There was a point at which I was sleeping on a yoga mat in a gym, and this was not long after I had published a book, okay? And I had a master's degree, so I was perfectly employable, I thought in my own head, but that wasn't the case at this particular time in life. And I had $0, less than $0, because I had all that student loan debt. And I remember simply saying to myself, Rob, you're either going to live this happiness thing or you're not. And it's amazing when anything is life and death, particularly happiness, you get really good at it really quickly. And one of the things I began doing right away is saying, I can either talk about and torture myself with the idea that I have $0, which is true, or that there's only up from here. I can only go up from here. Or I'm wealthy in all kinds of ways that dollars cannot measure, which was perfectly true, right? And so that's the sort of third part about it. But I want to go deeper, and I'll keep this short, but it's probably the most important thing I'll say this entire conversation today. And that is, happiness isn't just what you do. Happiness isn't just who you spend time with. Happiness isn't just what you think. In fact, I'd argue that happiness is not what you do. Happiness is not who you spend time with. Happiness is not what you think. Happiness is what you are. Now, this is where I'm going to take a bit of a detour from where traditional positive psychology will offer evidence. But at the end of the day, okay, I have found without question, I am at my most blissful when my mind is quiet. It's cool, composed, and quiet, okay? When I experienced that suicidal moment and I dug the knife into my wrist and I experienced that indescribable bliss and joy and love and overall subjective well-being, despite external circumstances and conditions not having changed, what was the difference there? The difference there was that for once in my life, in my entire life, my mind was perfectly quiet. And I was present in a way that I had never been present before. There were no problems in my mind. There was no future. There was no past. There were no concerns. There was no plotting, planning, scripting. There was none of that. There were no desires. There's no fear. There was simply quiet. And in that silence, in that stillness, was perfect serenity. And so one of the greatest, most transformative tools I've ever discovered in my life, in my young 21 years of life, has been what I call simply a micro-meditation. You've probably heard of it before. I'm going to describe it a little bit differently, because when I was going through my happiness journey, I read every book on the planet. I was reading a book a day, not because I thought it was cool or I was super studious, but because I was desperate. I read every book and I tracked everything. And I tracked and kept what worked, and what didn't, I got rid of. So in that experience, as I'm tracking things, I, over time, practiced all these things I just mentioned. And I found something called a micro-meditation. A micro-meditation is simply one breath that you take as frequently as humanly possible throughout the day, with no other goal than to simply enjoy that breath. And you take it from the stomach and you let all your thoughts go. The first meditation course I ever took was torture. I thought I had a panic attack, was gonna have a panic attack, because I simply couldn't do it. It just felt so anxiety provoking for me. And I found that an hour was too long, 30 minutes was too long, 5 minutes was too long. One breath, anybody can do. So I promise, if you do this one thing, if you breathe from the stomach, you're going to induce the relaxation response, which will slow and reduce the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that's blowing through your body, right? So you're actually, believe it or not, you lose weight that way. You sleep better that way. You're less stressed and anxious that way. The less stressed and anxious you are, the more access you have to psychological capital and emotional capital and resources, meaning you're more creative, efficient, effective as a thinker, as a performer. That also allows you to get in a flow state more consistently. That's how you become Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, and you score 60 points or 81 points. But the idea is a micro meditation. At the deepest level, sometimes I just simply call it practicing the presence, because you want to go beyond the body and you want to go beyond a focus on the breath, and you want to be able to dial into the peaceful aliveness that's inside your body now. And here's where I'm going to wrap it up, because I want this point to really get driven home. Every case of unhappiness is a case of mistaken identity. Every single case. There are no exceptions to that rule. How do I explain that? Very simply. If and when I am identified with anything external to me, a life condition or circumstance that I know, that we all know, is ephemeral, we're screwed. If we want lasting, meaningful, and abiding happiness, but we pin it to things that are always changing or evolving, there's no way to be happy. If I identify myself, or I pin my happiness to anything that comes and goes, I'm in trouble. There's something within you that you are, that never comes and goes, that does not stay or does not leave and does not visit. It's always and abidingly you and yours. I simply call it life. That same life intelligence, okay? That, and you ever think about this, the earth hangs on nothing. So think about this just for a second. The earth hangs on nothing. So we all sit on this rock. This rock sits in midair in the sky. It's been doing it forever. Just think about that for a second. We're all on top of there. We're laying down, we're standing, we're walking, we're talking. This rock is spinning on its axis, and it's spinning fast. Not only is it spinning in midair, but it's revolving around the super hot star that we call sun. It's just far enough away from the sun to not have us freeze and not just close enough to not have us burn up, okay? That same intelligence, whatever you want to call it, I simply call it life, you can call it God or source or spirit. That same life intelligence is the intelligence that keeps your heart beating, that keeps your lungs breathing, that allows your brain to orchestrate it all. Whatever that life intelligence is, it is not something that comes and goes. It's something that's been with you your entire life, right? And that, when you take a micro meditation or enjoy a micro meditation, remember the point is to enjoy it, not to get good at it. If you try to get good at it, you won't get good at it. The way to get good at it is to not try to get good at it, but instead to enjoy it. As you practice this micro meditation, at some point you can take it deeper and simply feel in to the peaceful aliveness in your own body, right? That is what I call practicing the presence. Presence, for me, is the master key to happiness, and happiness is the master key to success. So thank you.
Wow. I was just writing down some notes, a last note here. I've been writing so many notes. And hey, if you've got some questions for Robert, please pop them in to the chat box so that I can see them, and we'll be able to get those answered. So there was so much in that, and people in the chat box are just going, wow, this is deep, this is fantastic. You know, the first thing I've got written down on my notes here is happiness is your gift to the world. That story that you shared about your interaction with that young man, you know, that is something that's I'm going to take from this, because we have opportunities every single day in our interaction, whether it be on social media or whatever it is, to speak our truth into someone's life and bring them from the depth of despair. And we need to take that on and realize that we have that gift. That was so, so powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Grant. That's powerful, brother. I really appreciate that. And by the way, you have the most infectious energy. You know, I love that about you.
Yeah, hey, and that's the thing too. It's not about being perfect. You know, I'm not always up, right? And that's okay too. I love how you believe the same thing. It's not about being up all the time. You know, and I was writing down the last thing just as you were finishing, and I'm just going to go to that while I remember, because I've got grey hair and I'm getting old and I do forget things. It's like, instead of trying to get it right, enjoy it. That's my new mantra for the day. I love that. That is perfect. Love it.
I love you sharing that, Grant. It's interesting. I remember coming upon this term, blisscipline, right? Like my whole life I'd been very disciplined, but at some point I realized I was becoming even more disciplined than I was before, but it was different. It wasn't as painful because I had made a commitment. If it's not fun or I can't make it fun, I'm going to try not to do it. But then I discovered you can make most things pretty fun. Add a little music, the right people, maybe get rid of the wrong people. But it's amazing the ways in which you can enjoy things more deeply, and as a result of that, be more successful.
Yeah, love that. Hey, before I go into my thoughts anymore, I'm going to just check in here. We've got here. Okay, so they're just comments, so hopefully you can speak to them. Thinking patterns are different in every individual. I think that happiness comes from satisfaction. Yeah, that was the conversation I was having with someone, that I wasn't quite understanding what Tahira was saying, and I was asking her whether or not is that contentment, but then she's just brought it back. So thinking patterns are different in every individual. How would you speak to that, Rob?
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's easy to begin to getting lost in semantics a little bit, right? So if we're talking about from a strictly scientific perspective, we talk about life satisfaction, it's mostly about conditions, circumstances of your life, and those things matter a great deal, right? Your quality of life, so to speak, or your standard of living, things of that nature. And so when we talk about, let's say, subjective well-being, or even positive affect, we might be talking about something slightly different. I would say that when it comes to thought patterns, that's true. Ultimately, we all have slightly different thoughts. They're not as different as we like to think they are. The interesting part, what we all share in common, is we all seem to share an addiction to thinking, even when, and especially when, we don't need to be thinking as deeply or as incessantly or as impulsively, right? And so that is actually much more important than the thoughts you have in your head. If you're obsessing about the kinds of thoughts that you have in your head, that in of itself is a problem. But the greater problem, the deeper problem, is that we take ourselves to be our mind, right? So we have a mind, but we're not our mind. We have a body, but we're not our body. We're something that's aware of the mind. We're something that's aware of the thoughts. And when you have that realization, and it's something that's visceral, not just something that's intellectual, it changes the whole game. It's kind of like riding around for days in your beautiful Range Rover, your Maserati, your Ferrari, whatever car you have. At no point in time do you ever mistake yourself for the car. When you go to the gas station or you get home, you step out of the car and you are able to observe, oh, there might be something wrong with the car, but it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. And you don't personalize it and invest your identity in it. That's sort of the difference between a deeper experience of what I'll call happiness and sort of a surface level satisfaction, right? Satisfaction is like, do I like the way things are going? Do I like the way people are going? Do I like the way my mind is going? Well, the truth is, your mind is always going to be going in certain directions in ways that you may not love, you may not appreciate. But can you step back and non-judgmentally experience and observe it from a place of dispassionate detachment, kind of the way you watch clouds in the sky? That's the difference. And if you identify as your thoughts, you will have thinking problems and you will have psychological problems. If you identify as your emotions, that's where emotional problems come. If you identify as awareness itself, no problems. If you identify as presence itself, no problems.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, look, I always talk to people about the fact that what you do is not who you are. And that's where a lot of people, get wrapped up in what their job is and whatever. And when they lose that job, then that becomes a problem because they feel they've lost their identity. So that's awesome. So I've got a couple of other questions here. Praise says, practicing the presence means staying focused in the present too, right? That's a question there. If yes, how do you stay off hard, long on hurting past? Yeah, so practicing and being in what I'm reading into that, practicing being in the presence. How do you do that? By leaving the past behind?
It's a great question. I love this question. So I think sometimes, I know for me at least, when I first heard, oh, be present or be or any of those things, even savoring, I would sometimes think that it meant living for the moment, but it doesn't mean that. It means living in the moment, which means sometimes you might be planning. You might be doing something that's, meant to set you up for the future, or you might be in certain moments reflecting on the past, but you're aware that you're reflecting on the past. You're aware of it. You're not lost in this mind stuff. And so if you've experienced serious trauma in your life of any kind, of course you want to have or approach, and get help from the proper professionals on getting some of that trauma work, done and sort of sorted out. But to a large extent, if you've noticed, most of us spend most of our lives thinking about the past and remembering the past and then projecting it into the future. And very rarely are we ever present enough to what's happening here and now. If we were, there'd be a lot more joy, there'd be a lot more love, a lot more peace. And not for a second am I suggesting folks shouldn't plan or any of those things, but the truth is that life is extraordinary. And it's an extraordinary life if you don't overthink it. And that's the challenge and the opportunity for all of us is, can we be more present so that we're more dialed into our psychological and emotional capital resources and be more creative, efficient, effective, and just honestly happier?
Fantastic. So one final question, and then we better let you go. We're so appreciative of your time. Yasmin's asking, is there a book that you can recommend, one that you love or one that's had the biggest impact or a big impact on your life?
So of course I have to shout out my positive psychology friends and colleagues and alum. I love The How of Happiness. Just an amazing book. I would definitely check that one out. Psychological Wealth was an Ed Diener book. I would definitely check that one out. Other books that I've loved, learned, Optimism and Resilience, Karen Rivich and Martin Seligman, all those books. I mean, I love all. Also, and if I would go into a slightly more sort of like almost spiritual space, I would say Be As You Are by Ramana Maharshi was an amazing book. There's so many fantastic books out there in the world. Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, still one of my top 50 books. But I think you'll find every book I've ever read has had some major nugget and gem that if I just apply, it changes my entire life. And so the one thing I want to say there and offer up to everyone is sometimes we really, and I love that's part of the summit, is we want to get more and more information. But remember, at the end of the day, you don't have to know a whole lot to be happy. In fact, sometimes the folks that don't know a whole lot, but apply a whole lot, are the most effective. So as Bruce Lee said, I fear not the person who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the person who has practiced one kick 10,000 times, right?
Love it. Fantastic. And hey, thank you so much, Robert. There's definitely a book that I've got on my list to get online and buy today, and it's one called Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art of Science and Fulfillment. So that's the book I'm going to recommend, because you're way too humble to recommend it yourself. Can I thank you from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of everyone. The comments are coming in. People are just loving this. You've just shared your vulnerability and your experience and expertise. And I know that what you've said today is going to, when applied, change so many lives for the better. So high five, dude. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing. And I look forward to continuing a relationship with you, and love to have a catch up soon.
Absolutely. Love you, brother. Love you guys. Can't wait to give you a hug. Have a great day.
Fantastic. All righty. Fantastic. So just as Robert's going, we're going to go for a short break. Go to the bathroom, do what you need to do, and grab yourself a drink, stretch, get ready, because we're about to come back and hear from our resident neuroscientist on the allure of neuroscience. So go and have a break, and I'll see you again real soon. Welcome back. Let's have a bit of a stretch. If you didn't get out of your seat, jump out of your seat. Bit of a stretch. And get yourself ready. Hey, how fantastic was Robert Mack? I'm so excited to have the opportunity to have him on this summit. It was absolutely amazing. I've got a list of things here, happiness islands. How good are they? I'm going to build some of those. All right, let's get on to the next speaker. This is going to be so much fun. I've had the privilege of being, with this lady for some time now, and I love neuroscience, right? I'm a neuroscience nerd, self-professed, right? And I say nerd not as a derogatory term, and I'm calling it to myself, right? I just love understanding this thing, right? Let me just get hold of my little friend here. This is amazing. And sometimes you can have things that, you can get into stuff and it can be very academic and it can sort of like go over your head. But I just love how this next speaker takes that and puts it in a way that's practically understood. Dr. Sarah McKay is a neuroscientist and science communicator who specializes in translating brain science research into simple, actionable strategies for peak performance, creativity, health, and well-being. Sarah grew up in New Zealand, where she completed a Bachelor of Science with honours at Otago University, then headed to Oxford University for her Ph.D. She summed up her thesis with the words nature, nurture, and neuroplasticity. After 5 years of postdoctoral research, Sarah hung up her lab coat to pursue a career in science communications. Sarah is the author of the Women's Brain book, The Neuroscience of Health, Hormones and Happiness, and the director of the Neuroscience Academy, which offers professional development programs in applied neuroscience and brain health. In 2019, Sarah hosted an episode of the ABC program Catalyst, exploring brain health, biohacking, and longevity. Sarah lives in Sydney's northern beaches with her Irish husband, and together they are raising 2 surfer dudes. And we're really excited to have her as our resident neuroscientist at the People Builders Institute. And I want to share her with you right now. Please help me welcome as she comes in, Dr. Sarah McKay. Hey, Sarah.
I shall unmute myself. Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
That's
Clearly,
my pleasure.
I'm seen and heard now.
You are. It's working perfectly. So I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the seductive allure of neuroscience. So over to you.
Yeah, the seductive allure of neuroscience. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Grant. Can people comment in the chat? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, they can comment, not in our chat.
Oh, not in our chat.
Yeah, so and I'll at question time I will
bring
some of those things for you.
So you'll let me know who they are and what they're thinking as we go along here.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, I'll just get into it. No, I should. So I do want to talk to you about this neuroscience, and as Grant has said, that has been my gig for many years. I met and fell in love with the discipline of neuroscience back in the very early 90s when I was at Otago University. No, actually, that's not true. I was at Canterbury University my first year of uni back in the early 90s, and was recommended by a psychology lecturer to read a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Probably, I usually have it lying around somewhere. Yeah, I do. By a chap called Oliver Sacks, who you may or may not have heard of. Wonderful neurologist, no longer earthside, who was absolutely very, very gifted and skilled at telling stories about the human brain and mind and what goes wrong with us when our brain malfunctions. And I was utterly captivated. So I actually changed universities to Otago University because they had a brand new degree on offer there that year in neuroscience. And it was one of the very first times this new discipline of neuroscience had been offered anywhere really in Australia or New Zealand. So this is in the early 90s. And I was the first cohort to graduate. from Otago. And just from the moment I started delving into all things brain, I was utterly captivated, and I really have been. And as Grant has, very nicely sort of told you a little bit about my CV, I was fortunate to win a scholarship to Oxford University, founded by the Wellcome Trust, to do a master's and then a PhD in neuroscience. I then moved to Australia. I did 2 postdoc fellowships here in Sydney at the Garvan and at Neura in Sydney, looking at various aspects of ideas kind of conceptually around plasticity, neuroplasticity. I then hung up my lab coat and moved into science communications, specialising within neuroscience. And I have done a lot within this neuroscience space, teaching online training programs in neuroscience. I've written a book. I've got another book that I'm about to start. I've written a couple of textbook chapters. I'm writing a textbook chapter at the moment. I've given a TED talk on the neurobiology of afternoon naps. I've been really kind of deeply immersed in this world of neuroscience for my entire career. A good kind of quarter of a century now. I've been working away in all of this. And look, I'm not really kind of saying all of this to talk myself up, but just to give you an idea about how long I've been working away within this discipline. And despite all of this time I have spent in this space, I am familiar with, I would say, roughly less than 1%, definitely less than 1% of all of the neuroscience literature that has been published. And of that I'm familiar with, I probably understand a very small fraction of that. I went online just before the call started to get a rough count of how many academic papers had been published containing the word brain or neuroscience within the last year. From this time last year, 123,384. And in the last 5 years, over 500,000. Look, I probably have read 100 of them, if that. Just to give you a sense that neuroscience is incredibly broad. It's an incredibly deep and rich subject. And really, been doing this for 25 years, I really believe it's only just kind of coming of age. I've seen a growing interest in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, more so the last 5, this kind of growing thirst and interest in all things neuroscience and brain. As I said, it's kind of really only just coming of age. It's a discipline that is so enormous. It spans everything from, genes, and we have genes which build molecules, which build cells, which build neurons, brain cells, which also build glia, which provide half of the, support cells within the brain. We've got neurons and we've got glia, and these wire up and connect up to form networks and systems which can produce behaviors and sensation and perception and cognition, our abilities to think and feel and behave. There's so many layers in which we can explore this topic of neuroscience. And this sort of single organ, Grant was waving his brain around. I've got a plastic brain too here. I've got one inside here as well. It controls every aspect of our body. It controls our heart rate, our sexual activity. It integrates various, parts of the world and our body and our mind and our memories to create emotions. We learn, we remember. It's integrated with our immune system to control our response to disease, and in some ways determines how well we will respond to a medical treatment or not. Ultimately, it shapes all of our thoughts and our hopes and our dreams and our imagination. It's, our brains are what make us human. Like, brains are cool. I'm a very happy nerd spending my time wallowing around in this world of neuroscience. But there's a few problems that we've got, and these are kind of what I want to talk to you about today. I don't want to come on to this talk as a neuroscientist and just, throw out a few neuroscience sounding words that you'll get excited about and may not be able to do anything with. I want to approach this from a bit of a different perspective, and one that you may not really have considered before. I want to start off with a quote from there's a neuroscientist out there called Robert Sapolsky, who says that little can be understood about humans if we proclaim that a certain brain region or a certain gene or a certain hormone or a neurotransmitter explains everything. And herein lies one of the problems we have with trying to translate neuroscience. If we're trying to understand why we humans do what we do, and really that's generally why most people are interested in neuroscience, why are we the way we are? We have to factor in a whole lot of factors. I just talked about this sort of idea of gene to molecule to cell to network. We have to look at the neurobiological events that have taken place 1 second before a certain behavior, and the hormonal events maybe from a few days before, and perhaps neuroplastic changes which have taken place weeks before, epigenetic events that may have taken place in our childhood, our fetal environment, the genes that we have gained from each parent, and decades and centuries and millennia of culture and ecology and evolution. There is a whole lot we must take into account in order to understand any human behavior. So we're kind of stuck because we're busy sort of proclaiming this part of the brain does that. We have this part of the brain is the fear center, or that part of the brain lights up when we are expressing empathy for someone else, or there is a gene for depression. These very simplistic statements kind of hardly scratch the surface of this sort of this extraordinary field of neuroscience. And herein lies the problem. I can kind of see this from a number of perspectives. The problem is what we're trying to do is translate neuroscience research, take it out of the lab and make it relevant to our lives. We're trying to make it relevant to the clinic. We're trying to make it relevant to the classroom. We're trying to make it relevant to, the corporate boardroom, where, we're trying to translate it for teachers. We're trying to translate it for health professionals. We're trying to translate it for coaches and leaderships and social workers and HR professionals. We're trying to go from brain scan to classroom lesson plan. And I'm not convinced that we're quite there yet. This idea of translation, this even going from the lab bench to the bedside, which is a pretty tried and tested translation pathway, is really, really, really difficult. It takes a really, really long time. The complexity that we have is we've got the brain, we've got the sort of state of affairs, and we're trying desperately to translate it into something meaningful. And sometimes I think we've been a bit premature. I said neuroscience is only just kind of coming of age, and we've got, there's a real legitimate desire. We've got policymakers, we've got politicians, we've got people who are really interested, and rightly so, to use scientific evidence to inform policy. We need evidence-based policy. That's pretty clear. I don't think anyone can argue with that, especially within the space such as mental health or education, coaching, trying to help people. But the problem has been that there has been such enormous enthusiasm for this that people, have almost kind of got a little bit ahead of what neuroscience can do. It's almost as if we're asking so much. We're going from brain scan to classroom plan, and there's a big gap in there still. And the gaps are kind of where I've spent a lot of time in the last sort of 5 or so years. As Grant said, he got to know me because I teach an online professional development program in applied neuroscience and brain health. And I saw that this was a really important space that needed to be filled. And we see this, we've seen it time and time and time again over many, many years and in many, many disciplines, this problem of trying to translate a particular discipline, particularly within science, into something that's really real and usable. We've got complex science, we've got an urgent desire. It's only understandable that we want to do that. But what happens when we have a gap? I mean, what do you do if you've got a gap? You fill it with polyfiller or blue tack or something that kind of does the job, and it looks like it'll do the job, especially if you kind of paint over it, you're kind of masking the gap. But what I think it would be nicer to do was to sort of start with a really solid foundation in ways that we can, you know, confidently engineer that gap instead of just filling it with gumph. Because what I've seen over the years, particularly within the neuroscience space, and it is why I have been so compelled to do what I do, is that we have these gaps and they have become filled with waffle, with fads, with bandwagons, with mediocre grey-haired American gentlemen of the brain who see business opportunities, ways to make some money by packaging up science prematurely into self-help. And they, what I like to call, doing a little bit of neurosplaining. And there, you know, there's some real issues here. We've got plenty of businesses out there that have been packaging up brain training, you know, online brain training. And for many years there, they were claiming that you could, you know, sit down when you got home from work after a tough day, pop on the computer, do a little bit of brain training game and not get Alzheimer's disease. Well, that idea was quickly dismissed once we found that it was entirely lacking in evidence. The claims were completely overblown and many companies were fined and stopped marketing their products in the same way. We have these concepts of brain gyms which have been rolled out unwittingly to thousands of schools around the world, claiming if only children spent more time crossing their arms and limbs, they would be able to learn with such greater ease, which again has been utterly and entirely debunked, and many millions and millions of dollars have been wasted, and time on educating children has been wasted with these dubious claims which have been packaged up. There's you know, claims out there that, you know, if you can only change how you think, tapping into neuroplasticity, perhaps you can even improve your income. Now, look, before you think I'm on some kind of snobby academic soapbox alone here, these problems have been very, very well addressed, and they have actually been very well examined and addressed within the academic literature. This kind of world of gap filling out there has kind of led to, and in turn has been propped up by a couple of really big problems within this field of neuroscience. One of them is this idea of neuromyths, and the other idea is the seductive allure of neuroscience explanations. Now, neuromyths have a specific definition within the research space. Neuromyths are a field of research in their own right. I've just downloaded a few papers here, just so you don't think I'm, as I said, having a little personal rant about this. Paper here, neuromyths in education, prevalence and predictors of misconceptions amongst teachers. So we have academic literature around this concept of neuromyths, and we have this wonderful and fascinating literature called The Seductive Allure of the Neuroscience Explanation. And got a couple of papers here which I'll talk through. So this isn't just me having a little personal rant as a neuroscientist. I thought it would be really interesting, as I said, let's approach neuroscience from a bit of a different way for you all this morning. Let's take a look at some of the academic literature around neuromyths and the seductive allure of neuroscience. So neuromyths are really misconceptions about this has a formal definition that neuromyths are misconceptions about the brain that are either not yet supported by the data or have been actively contradicted by the data. So there are these ideas about the brain which either not yet proven or disproven, yet permeate the public imagination. Seductive allure of neuroscience explanations, you know, almost that particular phrase, and it gets rather entertainingly, I think, turned into an acronym, SANE, SANE, seductive allure of neuroscience explanations, also has its own specific definitions and has a growing interest in research around it. It's been kind of going on for a bit of a decade now. The very first paper that was published in this space is kind of like the I suppose the classic of the space. Is actually first published back in 2008 by a group from Yale University led by Dina Weisberg. And they've first published in kind of this particular phrase, this seductive allure of the neuroscience explanation. And they set out to try and explore why people are more likely to believe a particular explanation about human behavior, particularly some psychological explanation about why humans do what we do, is either more impressive sounding, is more relevant, is more believable, or is more actionable if neuroscience is added in there. And so they created a number of circular arguments or a number of long-winded explanations which included neuroscience or didn't, or made a lot of sense or didn't make sense, in order to sort of test out what people kind of took away from that. And they might have had a phrase, for example, humans like dogs. I like dogs. I've got a dog here on the floor next to me, sound asleep. He normally comes and says hi in the middle of a talk somewhere. What? Do you want to come and say hi? Hey, completely asleep. Oh, he's moved his head to look at me. I like dogs. Everyone loves dogs. Most people love dogs. Here's one of these sort of circular arguments I had. Humans like dogs because we have a strong preference for domesticated canines, which if you apply a little bit of critical thought is meaningless. We like dogs because we like dogs. Humans like dogs because our parahippocampal gyrus in the brain lights up when we interact with canines, signaling to us that we feel pleasure. Again, we like dogs because a region in our brain indicates that we like dogs. There were a number of different arguments and different statements that were made along these lines. And essentially what the researchers concluded was that when a neuroscience explanation was added in, people found it satisfying, they found it believable, they found it actionable. They were far more likely to believe that it must be true, even if the statement was senseless. Humans like dogs because we like dogs. A second paper was published reasonably soon after that, exploring this similar idea, the seductive allure of the neuroscience explanation. But this was called Seeing is Believing, the Effect of Brain Images on Judgments of Scientific Reason. And again, similar kind of approach, but again, someone might be talking about humans like dogs because they like dogs, but it was done with a large image of a brain behind them, or in particular, a brain imaging image, an fMRI or an MRI image of the brain. And again, people were far more likely to believe what was said was true, were far more likely to be compelled to act or agree with the particular statement if there was an image of the brain there. Now, over time, there was some inevitable pushback, and this is often the case. I mean, the seductive allure of the neuroscience explanation is a pretty exciting sounding research field, and that's kind of been, tinkered with and passed down now. And there's a paper that came out, the selective allure of the neuroscience explanation, and the seductive allure of neuroscience. The seductive allure is a reductive allure, and so it goes on. But essentially the findings, even though they kind of went back and forward a bit, have kind of landed in the same place. And rather interestingly, and perhaps disturbingly, depending on your approach, one study even went so far as to look to see how much on very serious issues, social issues, one on the death penalty and the other taking a look at abortion, found that if neuroscience explanations were provided as justifications or not, people, depending on a person's attitude, for example, towards the death penalty, they would believe the neuroscience and give it a far more favourable rating if it supported their personal attitude to the death penalty. If their attitude was that the death penalty was inappropriate, then they were far more likely to denigrate the science. And similarly, attitudes were found around abortion. So we can see, even when we're starting to dig down into quite serious social issues here, the presence or absence of a neuroscience explanation can be incredibly compelling. And we're starting to see it sort of seep into the justice system, whether or not people should be, sentenced at a particular age based on what we understand about brain development. And it has some really serious implications beyond just, some neuroscientists like me going, well, you shouldn't just believe everything that you hear about the brain. I mean, in short, what this means is people like neuroscience explanations, even if we don't need them. Now, I believe there are some upsides to this, not just this kind of this dark side of showing an interest in neuroscience. So if you are a person that helps other people, if you are a teacher, if you are a coach, if you are a leader, if you are in some way working with or helping, other people understand a little bit more about who they are and why they think and feel the way they do, perhaps you're interested in yourself, perhaps it's your children, perhaps it's parents, perhaps it's just, kind of taking a look out at, what's happening in the world right now and why people behaving the way they are. If we can in some way, what can we kind of take from this idea of this seductive allure? And I'll say this is a bit cheesy, it comes from a Spider-Man movie or something, but it can be like a superpower. The ability to talk about neuroscience in a really clear, informed way can be a superpower, but you've got to use it wisely. Like any superpower, if you're going to seduce people in with this allure, you've got to use it wisely. We can use neuroscience in three really powerful and useful ways. We can talk about basic neuroscience concepts. We can talk about neuroplasticity, how that is involved with things like synapse proving, the removal of unwanted connections in the brain at different stages of development. And that can give us some insights perhaps into childhood brain development that could maybe translated into the classroom. We could talk and understand about how neuroscience is done, how scientists figure things out. And I have to say 2020 in particular has been a fantastic lesson for people outside of neuroscience or outside of science in general as to how the scientific method is done. We've seen science live streamed during 2020 in terms of the exploration of this pandemic. People have never seen science live streamed. They've never seen the shades of grey. They've never seen how data can inform or misinform and how policy decisions have to be made based on perhaps uncertainties of that and how messages can be switched almost based on new data coming in. It's been a fantastic lesson into how science has been done this year. So we can talk about neuroscience concepts, we can talk about how neuroscience is done, and we can talk about how we can apply these ideas from neuroscience. But as I've said, this is quite tricky. Now, this idea of talking about neuroscience, there are some spaces in which this has been tested out and shown to be useful. And if we're going to be doing it, like I say, we better be doing it with wisdom and thought and care. One space in which this has been done particularly well and has been tested, one of the few places, believe it or not, in which it has been tested is within mental health, particularly in this space of what we call psychoeducation. So a method that it's like an adjunct method. It's a extra tool that we can use for helping people dealing with mental health issues, with mental illness. So it kind of blends a psychotherapeutic approach with a cognitive behavioural approach, and that we are giving people the tools in which perhaps you've got anxiety, serious anxiety. Everyone's a little bit more anxious this year than normal. I am myself, despite knowing a bit about how the brain works. A psychoeducation approach to anxiety would be to give people perhaps tools in which to challenge their thoughts and resultant feelings and behaviours, but also teach them about how the brain perhaps responds to threats and challenges and opportunities, and how that may be integrated into a stress response, and when a fear response may be appropriate or not. Now, this has been pretty well tested, and if this educational approach to talking about the brain is used alongside a particular therapy, we can see it aids in the process of recovery. Now, this is one of the few places in which we have any good clear evidence that talking about neuroscience works. It is one of the few spaces, if you are a real stickler for doing this in an evidence-based way, this is one of the few places that talking about neuroscience has been tested and has had an outcome. And so what have we seen? We see people, gain a more extensive understanding of their habits and perhaps their automatic responses to events. For children, young people, it can help stimulate kind of curiosity and interest in themselves. And it often helps people depersonalize some of their responses. It helps them kind of go, okay, this is happening in my brain and body and nervous system. And it gives them the ability to kind of place almost a biological framework in a way around that and step back and take a bit of a look. So it has its uses. Interestingly, as I said, one of the few spaces in which talking about neuroscience has been tried and tested. Classroom, we're not really seeing much. Coaching space, we haven't seen any work done in that space at all. What are some of the downsides, though, if we're going to, start plugging these, ideas about the brain? For me, one of the major risks that we see in this space and has been explored in terms of the seductive allure of the neuroscience explanation is just, quite frankly, lack of education. Lack of neuroscience education, and of course that is not the reach of most people. And I'm in my mid-40s. Neuroscience wasn't even offered as a type of degree until I was in my 20s. We have a lack of science literacy in general, particularly children coming through school now. They're doing a cracking job in education, particularly here in Australia. My kids' science literacy, understanding the scientific method, it's not just a collection of facts, it's pretty good. There's a lack of critical thinking in a lot of the general population. Kids are being taught this now, which I think is really encouraging, but kids aren't the ones that are using this stuff yet. They're not the ones making policy decision. They're going to be able to really, my 10-year-old isn't going to be able to influence much, for a good another, 10, 15, 20 years, if that. Might be too late. Who knows? So we don't need to just teach this stuff at schools, okay? It needs to be the basis of a lot of work that people do within broader education, within broader coaching, training, in the work they do. Even these basic ideas of teaching critical thinking skills and understanding the scientific method, you pick up any basic psychology textbook these days, it will be in there. So that's one problem. We've got a real gap in people's knowledge and education. And because of this, we have this infuriating reliance on these fads, these brain gyms, these, ideas, and a lot of older ideas that, perhaps make intuitive sense but have no basis, or have been disproven. And there's also a bit of a criticism in the space that, neuroscience hasn't actually really led to any new methods yet, even within mental health. One of my best friends from early childhood is in New Zealand. She's a psychiatrist. I'm a neuroscientist. And as she says to me, well, I don't need a brain imaging to tell me if a treatment works. I just ask the patient how they think and feel. We don't need to be always peering inside the brain. So this misuse of these neuroscience explanations has, propped up, and kind of we end up in this vicious cycle. We've still got these neuromyths. So I just want to touch on some of these neuromyths briefly now, because I'll be really curious. I can't see the comments. I have no idea how you're all responding to this, but I'm not sure whether these ideas are those in which you believe. The research that has been done into belief of neuromyths, these ideas that have been disproven or not yet shown to be true, have been classified, and there's a core group of sort of 7 or 8 classic neuromyths, which people by and large believe. Over 50% of people in the population typically believe. One is this idea of learning styles, that we all have a different learning style, and if only we taught someone in the appropriate visual or auditory or kinesthetic way, they would learn better. That has been disproven, and it is perhaps one of the most believed myths about the brain. This idea that physical movement coordinates the left side and the right side of the brain. We have another left brain, right brain. We have left brain or right brain learners, or ways of thinking. You are either a creative right brain person or an analytical left brain person. Again, we have zero evidence. In fact, we have many studies disproving that. We have I think it's falling out of favor a little bit now, the Mozart effect, the idea that listening to classical music will help you concentrate, or even, playing classical music to an unborn child will make it smarter as its brain wires up. Again, disproven. Another really popular myth, and I see this, I try and ignore parenting commentary now. My boys are getting old enough, I'm trying not to buy into it, this idea that sugar causes hyperactivity and lack of attention in children. Again, we have no evidence for that, believe it or not. And then perhaps the most well-known myth of them all, and I get asked this often, we only use 10% of our brain. So they are these 7 classic neuromyths, tried and tested within the academic literature, and a good 50%, give or take, of people believe at least one of these to be true. Most annoying to me, however, and Grant will probably nod his head and be familiar with some of these with me, by far and away, the story about the brain, which annoys me almost more than any, and I am on my soapbox about this, but I'm not alone, is the idea that we have a reptilian brain or a lizard brain lurking deep within us, which kind of guides all of our behaviors and overrides our critical mammalian ability to think and make decisions. I'm happy to discuss that in more detail if anyone wants to later, but I've got a blog post talking about why I think we need to rethink the reptilian brain. No neuroscience textbook that has been written within the last couple of decades mentions the reptilian brain, unless it is to say it is a load of neurobunk. Here's another one that kind of is perhaps just because this is a real sort of subtle idea out there, that neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, helps us learn. That's not how the brain learns, believe it or not. Perhaps doesn't get me as riled up as the old lizard brain myth does. But there's another myth. It's not really necessarily a myth, but it's a way that we talk about the brain, which isn't necessarily true, that each part of the brain has a particular function and lights up when it is performing that function. And again, we have moved far away from this idea of functional localization, particularly for most of our more complex behaviors and thoughts and feelings within the brain. Now, if we kind of get back to the nitty-gritty academic literature, you know, how these factors and myths have emerged and proliferated has been, you know, these ideas have been identified. And number one is this idea around education, lack of critical thinking, the inability to be able to take a look at these basic science questions and then make that accessible or relevant into that space. You know, lack of professionals and professional organizations who are working within that polyfilled gap. Instead, as I said, we've got the mediocre American gentleman of the brain packaging things up and you know, flogging it to everyone. And again, this is propagating all of these ideas. By and large, and essentially, we underestimate how complex this space is. We underestimate how complex human behavior is. And we just want these simple answers. So I'm not going to bang on anymore about all of these ideas, which you may believe, which may not be true. I'm just going to make one very, very strong recommendation. And then I'm going to give you a simple tool that I want you to take away from this. My one strong recommendation is, if you are interested in learning about the brain, if you are interested in learning about neuroscience, try learning about it from a neuroscientist. There are a lot of neuroscientists, neurogurus out there. If you are a teacher wanting to learn more about education, you probably learn about it from people working within teaching, within education, you know, within educating educators. You know, if you're a doctor wanting to specialize in cardiology or, you know, dermatology, you're going to go to the experts within that space who work, learn, research, and teach within that space. If you're a coach and you're wanting to gain qualifications, I imagine and I hope that you would go and learn from people qualified, working and teaching within this space. Please don't go and try and gain your neuroscience education from someone who talks about quantum theory and relates that to synapse plasticity and somehow links it up to the universal consciousness and wraps it up in a pseudoscientific, fluffy spiritual bow, and then delivers it with the confidence of these blokes over in the US. There are some recommendations. I have some recommendations for you, and I can provide these in writing, maybe to Grant if anyone wants them. There is one neuroscience adjacent gentleman that if you work within the space of mental health, education, coaching, therapy, psychology, I recommend you meet. I know all of these people personally. John Arden is one of them. He has written a couple of really interesting books, one in particular called Brain to Brain. Now, he's not a neuroscientist, but he is a psychologist, therapist, and works in a very legitimate, thoughtful, and caring way within the space. So you can follow him. My old mate, Andrew Huberman, who is absolutely smashing social media and neuroscience education at the moment. He's a professor at Stanford. We first met when we were doing our PhDs many, many years ago. And he does an absolutely exceptional job, especially via Instagram, on educating people about neuroscience. Sarah Jane Blakemore is a researcher. She's just moved from London to the University of Cambridge. Her father was actually my PhD thesis examiner, Colin Blakemore, and she works within the space of child and adolescent neuroscience. And she's she's sort of the doyenne, the sort of the founder of this space of adolescent neuroscience. Again, an exceptional person to follow, thoughtful, particularly within the space of education. And Lisa Feldman Barrett, who has an exceptional book that came out a couple of years ago called How Emotions Are Made, and has a brand new book coming out in another few weeks. I think it's something like 7 facts about the human brain. And I was delighted to see that one of those chapters is devoted to debunking ideas around the reptilian brain. And all of these people do a lot of work within neuroscience education outside of the research that they do. They're exceptional communicators. They're thoughtful, and I believe that you can trust them, the neuroscientists. If you want to learn about neuroscience, go and learn about it from a neuroscientist. If you're kind of slightly out of that like neuroscience space, Caroline Webb is a woman from the UK who does a really wonderful job within the coaching space, kind of combining behavioral economics and organizational psychology and neuroscience. And she's written a book called How to Have a Good Day, which I think is excellent and thoughtful and wise. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to give you something that doesn't make you feel deflated for someone who's been trying to talk about neuroscience or think about neuroscience or learn about neuroscience for a while. So you're completely, scared off wanting to do any of this ever again. I'm going to sort of introduce you to this really simple model. Grant will be familiar with it. It's called bottom up, outside in, top down. And what it does is give you a kind of a framework in which to think about the complexities of the brain, because this quote I gave you at the beginning of this talk, and this idea I've taken from Robert Sapolsky, is we need to be considering events, neurobiological events, endocrine events, neuroplasticity events. We've got all these, the brain is kind of this prediction machine that is pulling in data from a load of different sources, and then predicting and making best guesses about what to do next. And this framework will give you a bit of an insight into that. So I'm just going to share. I think I can share my screen here. So just to give it a bit of, just show you how complex this stuff is, and then give you this framework. I always find this really, we talk about has there a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's disease? Here's a diagram looking at all of the genes that have been identified and involved in something like Alzheimer's disease. And I mean, that's not even taking into account lifestyle factors. These are just genes involved in Alzheimer's disease. So, none of us have got any hope. Can't even scratch the surface of that literature. Here's a reasonably new update on various stress response pathways in response to something as simple as a physical threat, bleeding out, extreme heat, extreme cold. We're not lizards with fight or flight responses. There's a lot of arrows there. We're interested in, wiring diagrams around the brain and motivation pathways and happiness and pleasure. And we know that there's this dopamine neurotransmitter involved. Well, here's what we would call a wiring diagram of a single dopamine neuron in the brain. So again, there's a lot going on. Okay, we're dealing with really super complex systems here. We can't make simple statements. What I would like to do is introduce you to this idea of considering anything within neuroscience, anything about the brain. It's complex. here's a framework in which you can sort of start trying to consider the various inputs. All of this, the brain is a prediction machine. It's pulling in data from a lot of different places, and it's kind of, you know, computing what it's going to do next. There's information coming in from our bottom-up biology. You know, our brain sort of sits within our skull, inside our brain, and there's information coming into the brain that is determined by our bottom-up biology. You know, our genes, we've talked about, you know, our genes, our hormones, and they could vary depending on your age, your sex, time of the day, time of the month, time of the life, male, female. We've got hormones. Our immune system. People are probably thinking a little bit more about our immune systems in 2020, I think. You know, we've got signals coming in from our gut, and people are getting really excited about these gut-brain interactions and the microbiome within the gut. Again, more data, more signals being received from the brain, the food we're eating, how we are moving our bodies around through the world, you know, how we're even using our muscles. Muscle strength, muscle integrity is related to cognitive fitness, you know, how we're sleeping our body. Okay, so the brain's receiving all of these signals from the bottom up, super complex. It's also moving through the world and receiving all kinds of signals and information and data from the outside in. Who are the other people that we've surrounded with, you know, who are in our immediate families and our extended social support networks? Who can we see? Who can't we see right now? Who's far away? Who have we been interacting with? You know, what was our relationships like in our early lives? You know, what were these social signals we were receiving from early childhood? What external stressful events are out there, these kind of immediate stressful events or threats that may be right in front of us, you know, a car horn tooting that might give you a fright versus this kind of existential threat that we have at the moment from this pandemic. You know, we've got all these life events which are happening to us all the time, and these previous life events we've had as well, even the education that we've received, and of course, the interactions that we have with the natural world, with our light-dark cycles, with moving our bodies through the natural world and interacting with that. So we've got a lot of outside-in data coming in through our nervous system, through our eyes, through our retina, which is just an extension of the brain, into our ears and the sounds we hear, the food that we're taking into our bodies, you know, what we touch and feel and sense. There's a lot of data from the outside world coming in. And then our brain itself, this is a bit of a harder kind of slippery ball to hold on to, is also receiving data and input from itself in a top-down fashion. Our thoughts and our feelings are cycling between different networks, our mindsets, our beliefs. We can always kind of sometimes put a thought or a feeling or a belief like right here in the middle and go, what influenced that thought from the bottom up, from the outside in, from the top down? Why did the brain predict this emotional response in this situation based on the signals from our body, what we were feeling inside our body and the situation we were in and our top-down perhaps experiences or memories of that? So just to give you some examples of how I use this model and how you might use it in a way that might give you a bit of a brain framework, a neuroscience framework to think about really complex ideas. Let's put something in the middle like depression. People are really interested in depression. What makes depression? What causes depression? Now, depression comes in many, many shades of blue. Why might someone fall somewhere in the middle of one of those shades of blue? You know, what were the signals from the bottom-up body? Were you genetically predisposed? Is it a particular hormonal issue? You know, the withdrawal of the good hormones from pregnancy and those early weeks of motherhood. Have you got some kind of immune, you know, reaction going on in your body? Are you not eating the right food? Are you not sleeping? Have you not exercised in a while? Those signals will be contributing to depression. Outside in is some external stressful event triggered something. Have you lost someone you love? Are you separated from someone you love? Has there been some incredibly stressful life event, a divorce or job loss perhaps? And then we've got these top-down, perhaps disordered thinking. Perhaps we need a cognitive behavioural approach to readjust a response to an emotion. So we can put something like depression in the middle of this model, think about it in a neuroscience context, and then break down all of these various interacting factors. We could do the same with something like insomnia. You know, perhaps you need a bottom-up, outside-in and top-down approach. You need to work on your daily exercise, honor the light dark cycle from the outside in, perhaps reassess some of your attitudes to waking up at night. We could also look at ways to buffer an external stressful event, perhaps by ensuring we have enough sleep, by connecting socially, and by perhaps thinking about a previous time or a memory we've had in which we were able to manage stress. So this and the same for Alzheimer's prevention. I don't want to kind of belabor the point, but as I've said, this is an incredibly complex space. There are some people who are doing some really good work in here. We need to just sort of approach this wisely and not get seduced by complex ideas, trying to oversimplify them, and perhaps learning from the people who are filling the gaps with what we call these, seductive neuromyths. So as I said, I work within the space. This is kind of really my life's work, and I'd like to challenge you and encourage you to not be swept away on a wave of neuroscience excitement, but to approach it in a bit more of a thoughtful way, because we really should be doing the science and the scientists justice. So thank you very much.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, and everyone now understands why I, call you our resident neuroscientist, because I love how you can just take things that are complex and bandied around and put them into simple frameworks so that we can practically apply them. That top down, bottom up, outside in is just an amazing model to be able to, just like you showed us there, take a particular subject and go, well, how does neuroscience apply to that? Rather than just have all this stuff out there that people are saying. So there was a question here I just want to go to first. Barbara says, is one of the myths that exercise does not help us learn, or did I mishear that? So can you just help Barbara with that one?
Exercise does not help you learn. Going for a run won't make it easier for a child to come back to the classroom and be able to learn how to solve a maths equation. But exercise is really good for promoting brain health and providing the right scaffolding for a healthy brain to be able to interact with the teacher and then perhaps take on board, this new technique which has been taught around solving a maths equation, for example. So again, there's kind of a few steps in here. Sending a kid out for a run at lunchtime won't help them learn maths. You've kind of got to take a step back and take a bit more of a holistic approach to that, because what the problems that have come has been, we have gone into the classroom and taken this idea and misappropriated it. And the whole brain gym franchise, which is a global disaster, quite frankly, in terms of neuroscience, has promoted this idea that if children are crossing their limbs, they are exercising their brain and the brains are then learning. That's just simply not the case.
Fantastic. Thank you for helping Barbara with that. Yeah, so look, some of the things that you were saying there around, the neuroscience in coaching, I totally agree. And that's why you and I have, started working together, because, yeah, you're right, learn neuroscience from a neuroscientist. I mean, how profound is that? That is, here in Australia, this won't translate everywhere, but here in Australia for many years, we used to have this joke where we said, hey, if you want to learn something, just go down to the pub and ask one of your mates, because you'll always find someone that will give you an opinion on stuff that they know little or nothing about. And that's part of the human condition. Yeah, so look, I've taken this quite seriously in the coach training that we do, and making sure that we don't do what I did years ago. I would learn something from someone like you and go, oh, I could just take that and apply that, and putting it in the wrong context totally takes it out of what it was designed to do. So that's why, we're glad now that we have access to what it is that you teach in the People Builders Institute. So yeah, the myths are all great. That I don't know if you could see my face in the little screen above you, but when you were going like the reptilian brain, it does my head in, and this left and right brain dominance. There's still people out there that are teaching that stuff. I remember being at I know I've told you this, Sarah, I think I have. I remember being at an event, and I went there to this event to be introduced to someone that was going to be very influential for me. And I forewent doing that. I just forgot about why I was there, because I had this young lady, I was talking to this group of emerging leaders in this large management firm. And she said, oh, I was going to be a leader once, but then I did my Myers-Briggs and it told me that I wasn't. And it was like, hello, this stuff out there is so damaging to people's careers. So I love how what you've taught us there in that model in particular at the end is a framework for us to be able to go, in this current situation, we could use that as a filter for the information that's coming in, and to be able to put some, some truth around what it is that we might be thinking. So I really want to thank you. I'm just checking again if there's any other comments. We've had a bit of a challenge with the chat. I've learned something out of that as well. But if people do have questions, as I've told them, the easiest way is just hit reply on any of the emails that my team sent you or my system sent you, to give you the links and whatever. Ask me a question. If there's something that you want, I'm going to speak to all the speakers and see what I can get from them. It is their IP, so I'm not making any promises on their behalf, and then I'll make that available to you. So thank you once again, Sarah, for being the amazing person that you are. I was a bit disappointed that your dog didn't jump up, or one of your kids
he's a bit tired. It's a bit tired out. He normally does. Come here. Hey, come here.
So
No, he's absolutely zonked. He's had a hard morning,
He has, the poor thing.
Yeah,
so let's give Sarah a big round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much once again. And look, we can help you to get in touch with Sarah's work. So just let us know if that's something that's really of interest to you. If you want to join us.
You want to learn neuroscience? Learn from a neuroscientist.
Exactly. I love that. All right. So we're going to go to a break right now. We're going to thank you, Sarah. We'll catch you again shortly. And we're then going to come back with the amazing Deborah Thurley. So let's take a quick break and I'll see you soon. So make sure that you do a little bit of a stretch. We're coming back in just over 3 minutes. Okay, get ready. We're starting again in 20 seconds. Welcome back. Okay, let's keep this rolling. It's been an amazing morning so far. We had Robert Mack, who just was so vulnerable and brilliant, helping us around happiness. And then Dr. Sarah McKay, just helping us to understand and temper the allure, the seductive allure of neuroscience. But right now, we are going to learn all about the power of reset from an amazing lady in Singapore, originally from the UK, and her name is Deborah Thurley. She's a qualified mindfulness facilitator, educator, and faculty member of the School of Positive Psychology in Singapore, where she lectures in applied mindfulness psychology. She delivers mindfulness and positive psychology workshops, lectures, and training to organizations and schools to support and optimize well-being. She holds a postgraduate diploma in positive organizational psychology and leadership with the School of Positive Psychology and a master's degree in applied positive psychology with Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. Deborah is an engaging, experienced facilitator, and her teaching style is clear and concise. She lives, works, and celebrates in Singapore. Please help me welcome Deborah as she comes to speak about the power of reset. Come on in, Deborah. There we go.
Good morning, Grant. Morning, everyone. Lovely to be here with you all. So I'm going to crack right in. Before we start, may I ask everyone who's been in the session, who's joining for this session, please can you just grab a piece of paper and a pen or pencil to write with, because when I teach, it's really practical. And what I really want for you all today is to have some actual takeaways. So I'll be working with the slides, not death by PowerPoint, I promise, but I'll also be working the old-fashioned way, because I thought it would be fun to collaborate together and actually draw up some maps so that what I'm talking about and the theory behind it really comes to life for everybody. So if you've got that and you're ready to start, we'll begin. Now, let me see if I can share my screen. Here we go. So the talk is about the power of the reset. And I want to take you with me on a journey. So I'm going to invite you to play along just at the beginning here while we really get a feel for what this power of the reset is all about. So come with me on the journey. I'd love you to just put everything down for a moment. So put your pen down, just settle your hands in your lap. And if you're comfortable, just allow your eyes to close and bring to mind a time when you felt successful, when you felt celebrated, loved, cherished, valued, appreciated. So just with your eyes closed, just bring to mind a memory of that successful, happy time for you. Okay, and if you've got that, then I'll invite you to open your eyes. And how do you feel now? So turning to your pen and paper, please would you just note down for yourself just a few words to capture how do you feel on the back of that memory? So just do that now. We'll do that together. Lovely. So just a few words just to capture your feelings, your emotional tone right now. And I know that we can't actually share that as a group. I'm not in the Zoom room with you per se, But in the workshops and classes that I teach, these are some of the words, some of the emotions and feelings that do come up for people. So you might see one or two of your own feelings and emotions reflected here. So I'm going to stop the share now. I'm going to hop up and I'm going to capture a few of the words that you may have written on this chart, and we'll start our mapping together. So hopefully everyone can see this just fine. Grant, let me know if there's a problem with that. So for example, you might be feeling engaged or happy or appreciated or loved or successful, confident maybe. So I'll just take a few of these words from the overall feelings and tones that you may have reflected as well. Lovely. So we have one more bit of the journey to go. I'm just going to bring my screen up again. Thank you for noting that. Now I want to invite you to close your eyes again, and this time to think about a small argument or a very small disagreement, or perhaps a time when you read an email or a WhatsApp message that you felt, ooh, that's not quite right for me. So just with your eyes closed, just for a moment or two, bring to mind that event. We won't spend too long there. I'll invite you to open your eyes and again, ask you, how are you feeling on the back of that short remembering? So note it for yourself. Just capture your feelings, your emotional tone, just on the back of that memory. Do that now. We'll do that together. Good, beautiful. And again, because we can't actually be in the same room together and I can't see what you've written, I'll just pop up here some of the descriptive words of the feelings and emotions that people have on the back of that particular small memory. So I'm going to capture these up as well. I hope you can see that on the screen, and hopefully some of those words will have been exactly your own as well. So we've got some words which I'll scribble on this one: upset, disappointed, maybe you were feeling annoyed or stressed or irritated, angry. So I'll just quickly capture a few of those words. Thank you for playing along with me. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see on this side, we've got the words from the back of that memory and the words from the first memory, and I don't want to leave you here. So for the third time, we'll just close eyes together as a group. And can you please bring to mind the first event, the successful, happy, when you felt valued, appreciated, that first memory? Just bring that to mind now. Good, and when you feel anchored back into that positive emotion of that first memory, I don't want to leave anyone stuck on this side, please open your mind, open your eyes. All right, is everyone back safely? Good. So I want to just explore with you what happened just with that. Here we go. So we went from the happy, positive, successful sensation, feeling, or emotion, and we quickly jumped into a whole different range of emotions. And I know a lot of the speakers have been talking about, this range of emotions that come up for us as human beings. And we just had the experience of switching states. So we went from one to the other, and then we switched back. So the question is, how quickly did that happen? So you may have experienced that in just a few seconds. We sat with each of those experiences or those memories for no more than a few seconds, and it was enough to help us switch states. So hopefully you had a direct experience of that. Now, the question is, which state did you enjoy the most? And most people would agree it's the state where we felt successful, valued, appreciated, positive, loved, and so forth. So now you've had a direct experience of that. I want to show you what it looks like We go from feeling good to feeling bad to feeling good to feeling bad to feeling good, just like that. It's as quick as a few seconds or in the blink of an eye. So what's actually going on? We call it the emotional roller coaster. And the emotional roller coaster it works like this. Your life is going well. You're feeling good because you're getting all the right results. People are being complimentary. Nothing's shaking your world, right? You're having a good day. So you're feeling good. So we all have that experience of like, wow, everything's going my way. And then something happens. You read something, you see something, you hear something, and whoop, there you go, sliding down the emotional roller coaster. And suddenly you have this whole different emotional palette at play. So I think being human, we've all had this experience before, and you'll be very familiar with this. So this is the emotional roller coaster. And the question really is, what drives it? So what drives this up and down yo-yoing of life and how we feel and respond to life? And the answer, if you haven't already got it, is your mind, right? So just thinking about those two different scenarios was enough to trigger your emotions to shift from one state to the other. So just to really map it out so that you're aware of what our physiology is doing in every moment of every day, what we're thinking about actually sponsors how we feel. Okay, so I just want to add this to our chart together. So I'm just going to stop the share and come back to full screen for a moment. So what we're thinking about, let me just pop this into a box for you to keep it nice and tidy. So when we are thinking about something positive, we can call this positive, okay? And we had that lovely memory of that time. We noticed that the emotions flowed from here, that what we were thinking about gave rise to how we felt on the inside. And likewise, what we were thinking about when I invited you to think about that slightly tricky time, that more challenging time here, sponsored how we felt on the inside in that very short exercise that we just did together. So what we think about has a lot to do with how we're feeling. And that's actually critical to understand because that's at play all the time, whether you like it or not, whether you care or not, whether you're aware or not. And this is what helps to drive the emotional roller coaster. So when we're feeling whatever it is that we're feeling, we can get emotionally triggered by the combination of what we're thinking and what we're feeling about what's going on in our life. And what triggers us are all these external stimuli, so people, events, situations, things, and even results, right? So a result goes our way, we feel good. A result doesn't go our way, and we're like, we get that feeling inside of not being good enough or failing. And the point of all of this is to show how these feelings, emotions lead to our behaviors and actions or reactions, right? So we can very often have a range of emotions, and we tend to notice it most when we're triggered. So this reactivity is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to understand what state we're in so that we can work with that. So the world has tilted, and well, it is as it is right now for all of us, but it's very changed from a year ago or even a few months ago. So with the pressures that we're under, it's very easy to be overloaded, feel under-resourced, overwhelmed. Tiredness, exhaustion, and stress are kind of part and parcel of many people's lives right now. And that means that we get quite quick to become upset, frustrated, irritated, angry, all of those emotions that flood us when we're feeling pressured or under-resourced. So again, this is something that you're probably familiar with. We have all had to deal with quite a lot of strange and unusual events in our lives recently. So this might be something you're familiar with, looking a bit like this little mouse. When actually what we want to do is reconnect with this peace and this positivity. We've learned a lot about positive emotions over the last 24 hours with various speakers bringing in the work on positive emotions. So my job today is to introduce you to the pause and the reset and why this is so relevant and why it's so powerful, especially at the moment when we are being triggered and we are under pressure in this rather strange time. So I want to tap a little bit on mindfulness. So I am a mindfulness educator and teacher and instructor, and I bring that into this basket of emotional intelligence and positive psychology. But mindfulness, really boiled down to its very simplest definition, is just noticing what's happening right now. And then noticing not just what's happening, but what's happening on the inside in our inner landscape and what's happening around us. So the stimulus that I was talking about, these people, events, situations, circumstances, results, all of this contributes to our human experience, our lived experience, and the perceptions that we have every day of our life. We either don't notice or we do notice, and we start to wake up to who we are being in this amazing storm of life. So sometimes it goes our way and sometimes it doesn't. And so it's like, how do we anchor ourselves? How do we, in the middle of everything that's going on around us, how do we pause and create that moment of reset? So I'm going to lean a little bit into mindfulness, and I'm going to lean a bit into positive psychology. But the point of all of this is, how do we intentionally, with awareness, create a pause for ourselves when we need it? And going back to this emotional roller coaster, which I'm going to do just for a moment, coming back here. When we talked about that emotional roller coaster, I want to just give you a little bit more information about where this lives. So when we look at this emotional roller coaster of life, when we get this push from life, whether it's, like I was saying, something that we hear or see or connect with through our senses, we can either have a positive moment or we can have a negative moment. If we're talking just very basic, of course, there's a huge range, and I'm not saying anything is good or bad, but if we were talking about this positive and negative context, the emotional roller coaster can watch us slide down. So we have a lovely something here, right? So a lovely positive thing here and a lovely positive thing here and so on. And then when something happens, we can slide down the emotional roller coaster and we can end up getting a little bit stuck sometimes. So it's about, mindfulness will invite us to be aware of the process, what's happening in each moment of this slide down and this climb up. And it's the climb up actually that's very interesting to take charge of. So this whole thing about the pause and reset is about, how do we take charge of all of this for ourselves? Okay, so when we look at this sliding that happens here, what we need really is a toolkit to say, when I'm aware that I'm here and stuck and having a bit of a drama and I don't know how to get out of it, it's no longer about saying or waiting for someone to say, oh, you poor thing, or gosh, I see that you're having a bad day, let me help you. It's about recognizing for yourself that you need to throw down that anchor line and you need to wake up to where you're at and then to do something about it, right? So this whole pause and reset isn't passive. It's not just theory. It's about saying, what are these steps that I can take for myself when I need to? And it's about, how do I move from this stressy state or this negative emotional space? And how do I bring myself across? And so I'm going to give you a how in a moment. There are many, many hows, and we only have a short time together. So I want to bring you, or to give you a how, to show you how you can go from feeling stuck in this space to bring you into a more positive space. And we're talking about inside yourself, right? So for our own inner well-being. And I just want to give you a little bit more information here on this map. If I was going to label these, and in terms of our physiology, again, it's very basic, right? This is just a snapshot. This, where positive emotions live, is called our parasympathetic. Perhaps Grant can put this up in the chat. Parasympathetic nervous system. And that's a branch of our autonomic nervous system, which is our restorative system. So it restores our balance and it helps us to reset. And here is where we heal. This is where our heart rate normalizes. This is where our blood pressure drops and normalizes. This is where our digestion and all our body functions are optimized and functioning well. And this, if you notice, is where positive emotions are born. And this is where love is born. So when we're in this parasympathetic nervous system state, this is where we are at our optimum best in terms of well-being and flourishing. So positive psychology builds this for us. So positive emotions, there's a lot of research around positive emotions. Barbara Fredrickson, of course, is a giant in her field in this positive emotion research. On the other side here is the sympathetic nervous system. And this is our classic fight, flight, and freeze. So look, there are many different stress responses. We have the threat response and we have the challenge stress response. I don't have time to go into the different responses of stress. Stress can be really good for us. It can motivate us. It can trigger our tend and befriend stress response. It can trigger our learn and grow stress response. This particular piece about the pause and reset now is about how do we manage when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, when we have this stress come up and we feel that it's detrimental to our well-being. And this comes up whenever we feel the threat challenge. So something is threatening us, we feel under-resourced, we feel that we're not up to the task, that we don't want this. So in some way we're resisting or feeling underprepared. So on this side, I will say this is only the threat stress response, okay? So this is the typical stress response we get when we feel under threat. And back in the day, of course, that was all about the saber-toothed tiger about to have us for lunch, right? It was survival. So even this threat response has, of course, a profoundly beneficial impact when we need it to keep us safe and to keep us alive. But what happens in modern day times is that we often find ourselves triggered, right, by events such as the email or the bad report or the snipey comment or whatever it is that's going on with people around us or that we're connecting with. And so we need to be careful we don't get stuck here. And a lot of people live in this chronic stress state and don't decompress and don't release the stress effectively. And we adapt. So chronic stress can become quite adapted because humans are very adaptive at dealing with stress. It comes in and we go, fine, we can manage. So we manage. And then more comes in and we go, fine, well, we can manage that as well. And we get these higher, more elevated levels of stress building. And so really for well-being and flourishing and thriving, we need to be able to bring ourselves over to our parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, and this is where we go into restore, balance, homeostasis. It's absolutely critical that we train ourselves to be able to come here when we need to and when we want to. We don't wait for life to put us here. We bring ourselves here and then we build this for ourselves. Okay, so I wanted just to complete that map, and this is going to be the how, just one today in the short time that we have together. Hopefully this is all making sense. And just be aware that this is playing out all the time during our waking hours. This physiology of the autonomic system is shuffling us between these different states, that switching states that we had that direct experience of just now. Okay, so let's come back into sharing screens. And I want to introduce to you an actual technique, which is one of my go-to techniques. And I've been doing mindfulness since early 20s, suffice to say. It's a beautiful, simple technique, and it works with the breath. It's called the anchor breathing technique. And I'm actually going to teach it to you now so that you take away one way of switching states for yourself that you can use anywhere, anytime, and we'll do it together now. So the anchor technique, before I start, I'm going to introduce you to my chime. This is just a little singing bowl, and it sounds like this. And I use it so that I don't have to use my voice all the time. You don't have to listen to me all the time. And so I'm going to teach you this technique. It'll only take a minute or so. At the end of the technique, I'll chime that sound. And when the sound is completely gone, please open your eyes. That will be your sign to just open your eyes and come back into the room. Okay, so we're going to do it together now. So again, just putting everything down. If you're holding anything, just allow your hands to rest in your lap. And allowing your eyes to close, just get comfortable. So just sitting comfortably, allow your back to be supported, let your shoulders and arms relax. And with your eyes closed, just bring your awareness to your breathing. Notice that you are breathing. Now tapping your awareness, paying attention to your inhale and feel the flow as the air as it flows in through your nose. So just becoming aware of that flow of air as you breathe it in. And notice how your chest or your ribs or your belly expands and lifts with that inhaled breath. And pay attention to your exhaled breath. So notice the air as it flows out through your nose. Notice how the front of your body just gently softens and relaxes with the exhaled breath. And if your mind wanders off into thinking, as it may well do, just become aware and gently gather your mind and attention back and refocus on your breathing. Continue with this focus on your inhale and focus on your exhaled breath until you hear the chime. Good, so allowing your eyes to open. And how do you feel on the back of that very short practice? So again, just picking up your pen or pencil and making a note for yourself. How do you feel right now just by paying attention to your breathing? So note that for yourself now. Just capturing your emotions, your feelings, just noticing. Good, so while you're finishing up, I will just pop back into my slides. And again, because I can't see what you're writing, we can't share that together. These are some of the feelings and emotions that people from my workshops and classes have reported. And so I thought I would capture some of these up. Hopefully, again, you'll see some of these in your own list, or that you also have a sense of this. So let me just capture this. I'll just stop share quickly and come back here so that you can see. Okay, so calm, relaxed. These are the two big ones that always come up. Peaceful. Let's pop that in here. Notice where I'm writing it, in the parasympathetic nervous system branch of our autonomic nervous system. Look at where it's living, all of these feelings. Quiet, anchored, and sometimes even focused. Sometimes people report feeling focused on the back of just being with the breath. I'm curious to know, although you can't respond, maybe you could pop it up in the chat box for later. I'm curious to know if you felt your mind wandering off into thinking. Like, were you able to stay focused, did you have that mind wandering piece? Probably you did. Like everyone has that. It's a function of the mind that when we are relaxed, our mind wanders off. When we're stressed, our mind wanders off. And this mind wandering piece, I can't talk about that too much now. We're nearly out of time. I've got another 5 minutes or so. But if your mind wandered off, just be aware that that is normal. And part of mindfulness training and attention and focus training is to notice, oh, it's thinking. And instead of getting upset about it, just simply going, come back. And it's like you gather this wandering mind back and you place it on the point of focus. In this case, it was breathing, but it may be an email or it may be a conversation. So, when you take this focus and attention, which is what mindfulness training essentially is all about, or some of it is about, it's about saying, can I listen to the person I'm having a conversation with without my mind wandering off, imagining and thinking, and can I bring my mind to focus? So that's the training. Oh, it's gone, come back. Oh, so I'm breathing, I'm focusing, whoop, bring it back. So I just wanted to let you know that that is normal. And the work of mindfulness and training the mind to be focused with attention is exactly that, over and over and over and over and over again. Okay, so coming back to this, just to wrap it all up, I want you to notice the kind of emotions that live and build and grow in our parasympathetic nervous system, compared to the kind of emotions that live when we are in sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze mode. There's one more piece of this that I need to give you now. Two more pieces, actually. I want to draw up the breath. So when we have breathing, which of course we do all the time, we just don't remember that we're breathing and we're not necessarily aware. When we're breathing in that quiet, focused way that we just did together, you may note that your breath is a bit smoother, maybe a bit deeper, maybe a bit more relaxed. So in our bodies, we have this ribbon of breath, inhale, exhale, all the time. And depending on where we are in the system, it can change. So this breath can get quite short and sharp. We can even hold our breath, right? We can even hold our breath when we're really under threat or we feel very much on the back foot. And so the breath technique is as simple as when we're here in stress, chronic stress or acute stress, we pause. And we reset by simply taking this breath and plugging it in. So we take this smoother, deeper, more relaxed breath and we simply plug it in when we're feeling like this. So we feel like this, we wake up to the fact that we're feeling like this. We may not initially be aware, and we just use this breath. The simplest thing about taking this breath into when we're feeling stressed and irritated is that we trigger the move into parasympathetic nervous system. We actually switch states. So this whole thing about pause and reset is knowing that you can switch states anytime, just by focusing your attention on your breathing and establishing this smooth, slightly deeper, more relaxed breath. And when we do that intentionally and consciously in this state, it has this incredible effect of bringing us over into our parasympathetic nervous system, restorative, balance, homeostasis. And a very interesting thing happens, just to finish up, is remember on the earlier slide where we described this process, what we think about sponsors how we feel. And then we said our behaviors and actions come, right, on the back of how we're feeling. Well, watch this. What kind of behaviors and what kind of actions do you think, or do you know, would come from this space? When we're in this state, someone walks in the room, so your partner, your beloved, your child, your colleague walks in the room and goes, hey, and you're feeling rested and calm and peaceful, and you feel like life is good and you're good and everything's good. What would you say and do? What would you say and do from this space compared to what would you say and do from this space? What would your words and actions be coming from a space of being irritated, frustrated, angry, upset? Very different, right? Very different, profoundly different. So it's our work I believe, to understand, first of all, to wake up to where we are and then choose whether we're going to be here for a bit longer or whether it's time to shift ourselves out. And that's not to say that this is bad, but it is to say that we have the power when we wish, consciously and intentionally, that we can switch states. And this is a tremendously empowering piece. And I wanted you to share this with you so that you know this, because somehow it's not really taught. And I actually believe fundamentally that it underpins all of the work we do as human beings in terms of how do we grow, how do we move forward in life, and who are we being in our life? Who are we? And who are we when we're with other people in our relationships, at work, at home, at play? So I just want to end with one more tiny bit of information, which kind of wraps the whole thing together, is a little bit of research. So this isn't just something I'm making up. It's something that's under the pump in terms of evidence. This is something that we know about. And I just wanted to give you some of my favorite papers from an academic perspective. And just have a look at this, especially this one. So this breathing, this switch of breathing, when we plug it in, we take the breath and we plug it in, literally has the effect of switching states. So I hope that's been interesting and useful and practical. I just wanted to say thank you. Would absolutely love to connect with any of you on LinkedIn. Just search my name up and you'll find me. And I'm going to stop sharing now and come back into the main Zoom room, hopefully on time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Deborah. And yeah, you did great on time. You're actually just perfect on time. So thank you so much for that. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back through the chat here where you started. And in that first image you put up, people were putting that they were happy, they were satisfied, peaceful, content, successful, confident, happy, calm. I think that was, yeah, then it went to
Beautiful.
confused, embarrassed, desperate, tight, anxious, frustrated, unappreciated. And then when you took us through that beautiful exercise, by the way, your voice as a presenter, as someone who does what you do, is so calming just in itself, if I can just say that.
Thank you.
People went to relieved, calmer, relaxed, calm, sleepy. Now that one was something that is for me as well. I whenever I'm closing my eyes and I'm full on with something like this. But yeah, someone said they were sleepy, relaxed, and smiling. And yeah, definitely people had some mind wandering going on. I remember when I first started getting into mindfulness and meditation, like I'm an action taker, and like seriously sitting still, that's not something that was in my wheelhouse. And one of the things that I learned that I just want to add weight to what you were saying there, one of the things that I learned through using an app, I can't remember what it is now, but it had this beautiful thing where when I was in the state of focus and calm, and these little birds chirped, and when I shifted and my mind went away because I was using a device that was measuring my brain waves, and those birds would go away. The lesson for me was I used to get frustrated with that because it would talk about, it would show me how much time I spent in that zone of being fully focused. And what I learned out of that was that the whole exercise was not designed to just get me in that focused state all the time. It was to be able to reset and come back when I had gone off. Because, as you know, and as you've said, we're living in a world right now and always at the moment that's just full on. There's stuff everywhere that can distract us. So I believe in what you're saying there, that the power of this is the ability not to just stay, sitting on a mountain in a cave quietly and, being able to stay focused all the time, but to be able to come back, to be able to recognize and come back. So yeah, I think that was absolutely fantastic.
Well, Grant, I'll just jump in because there's this really interesting piece of research, which is kind of a gold standard now that we go to. So there was a study done in 2010. The authors were Killingsworth and Gilbert. They found that people in their waking hours on average, okay, this is always on average, but that we do this mind wandering piece, 46.9% of our waking hours. That's nearly 50% of our time, our mind is just wandering off. And there is some purpose to that. Of course, it's not a bad thing always, but it is about that waking up and being aware that, oh, my mind has wandered off again, and tapping it back onto focus. So yeah, quite extraordinary, that study.
Love that. Fantastic. Hey, I've got some questions here for you. So
Sure.
Swandi says, Deborah, please, can you recommend a book or two that can be helpful?
Oh, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you want just pure mindfulness, or whether you want mindfulness in the workplace or mindful parenting, Grant, perhaps we could give a resource list out on email. Would that be more helpful?
Yeah, look, definitely. As I said, I'm going to get all the speakers to, give me permission to send some stuff out, and I'll collate that after the event, and we'll send that out. So definitely we can do that.
All right.
What's your favorite? What's just on anything to do with mindfulness? I'm just going to put you on the spot. What's your favorite book?
Oh, I have so many favorite books. I absolutely love anything from Jon Kabat-Zinn, because he writes so profoundly and so beautifully. I love, there are a couple of books about mindfulness and parenting, which are just great. So yeah, I've got maybe 30 books on mindfulness. But actually, interestingly now, it's how mindfulness and positive psychology are connected, and how they sit under the PosPsych umbrella together, So look, positive emotions are growing here. There's all that research from Barbara Fredrickson. So it's kind of, how do you cherry pick and get all of it together to support well-being? And that's really what it's about. How do you grow awareness, and how do you grow kindness? How do you grow curiosity? And how do you step back from judging? How do you catch yourself judging? So all of these are thoughts, and how do we catch ourselves with the thinking, and then where do we want to end up? So I love the fact that mindfulness is becoming more and more practical, in the sense that when we apply it together with other information and other research and other modalities, that we can end up with a very powerful empowerment suite of tools for ourselves to navigate the world.
Fantastic. Another question here from Yasmin in Melbourne. If someone is living with a situation, perhaps they are a carer of a family member, which is frustrating almost constantly, would it help to just keep switching states 100 times a day? And obviously, we're not going to get too much into the content there, but yeah, just what's your overall thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Yasmin. And I would also say that this is a part of our work, is not just to go through life being at the whim of, other people's stuff. So when we feel that frustration coming up, when we feel that stress or that irritation or whatever it is coming up, as you've described, it's about going, oh, is this who I want to be right now? Okay, is this the best me? Is this reflective of who I really am? Because we can get carted away on a train of this. And this is when our behaviors and our actions reflect how we're feeling. So switch, and you'll have a respite, you'll have some restorative balance, and then you'll get triggered again, and then you switch again. So 100 times, yes, as often as it takes. And here's the thing, I know that our last speaker was talking about neuroscience. I wasn't able to watch because I was waiting to come on, but the neuroscience and that neuroplasticity shows that whatever we focus our attention on, whatever habits we establish, our brain supports that with growing new neural networks and so forth. So every time we make the shift, right? Every time we practice that breath, and there are many other techniques, but just that simple thing of shifting and switching, our brain will support that habit of, when it comes up, that feeling that we have the tool, we switch, and then our body can go, oh yeah, okay, I know this now. So it's becoming a habit then, that when it gets too much, or when you become aware, that you can shift. Absolutely.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah, so there's two things that come out of that for me. So, and you talked about these in your talk, and that is the power of the pause. And this is where, and this is the whole reason why I just don't teach emotional intelligence and go down that road. This is why this whole summit is about the combination of social and emotional intelligence with positive psychology and applied neuroscience, so that we can look at it from, you know, all different areas. And in the emotional intelligence side of things, you know, which I know Yasmin, she's one of our students, one of our alumni. It's that ability to be able to, in the moment, recognize what we're feeling, to label the emotion, to then, you know, take it down a road of controlling where that goes and designing the response that we're going to have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, around that, building those new neural connections through habit, where we start with a conscious effort to pause and reset. And then after a period of time, it becomes a strategy that is automatic, that when these situations come up, we used to go this way, but now we're more likely to go down here.
And here's the key, which a lot of people miss, is that you have to do the work when you're feeling okay. You can't build a successful habit when you only do it when you're under stress, right? So actually, I would say to anyone who's tuning in, do those resets for yourself here. Like, just tap into the breath, do the mind wandering, bring it back, so that you're training the technique here when you're feeling rested and calm and safe and secure. You're not under threat. So that when this comes up, you can lean into it. So it's always about just leaning into the practice, leaning into the habit that you've established. The best place to learn a new habit and to learn new ways of being is, of course, here when you're not under fight, flight, or fight stress, right? So it's here. The other thing I just want to end with, because I know I'm going to be running out of time, is this last thing, is that we have access to our executive function, our reasoning, our logic, higher order thinking, when our autonomic nervous system is in this mode, parasympathetic, right? So the vagus nerve, when we're here, our brain networks light up and we have access to higher order thinking. This is why we learn when we're coming from this space, versus something like the amygdala. So this is just a little bit of extra information. The amygdala, which is our fight, flight, freeze, fear center. So that's our, you know, our survival mechanism in the brain. That when that fires up here, we actually don't have access to this. So they move like this. If survival is high, we don't have time to think about, oh, wouldn't it be lovely? We are in this mode. So just be aware that if you're in this mode, it's really hard to make good decisions and good choices, or wise decisions and wise choices. When we're in this state, it's much more easy to react, right? So we get triggered, we react, and then we're like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And so we have this perpetual cycle, and that's when we can get a bit stuck. So lean into the practice, establish the practice here. Just close your eyes, do 30 seconds, 10 breaths, 8 breaths, and then wake up, carry on. Anchor, action, anchor, action. Yeah, it's really helpful to do it that way.
Love that. Fantastic. And people are saying thank you in the chat. Brilliant information. It's great. And I love how you've given us some things that are practical. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving up of your time and your expertise and skill to come and serve this great audience from all around the world. And I really appreciate you. As I said, I will speak to all the speakers, get their permission, collate some stuff. I'll put it somewhere. We'll make that happen. And I'm sure Deborah will be able to give you a list of resources. So thank you very much, Deborah. And everyone, if you could, as Deborah goes, can you give her a big round of applause and say thank you, gratitude, and I look forward to catching up with you. We'll have a bit of a chat sometime after the summit. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a lovely day.
Fantastic. All right. So what a morning. What a day we've had so far. All right. This has been absolutely brilliant. So we're in session 3. We've got one more to go yet. And if this is your first session that you've come to this morning, welcome again. Thank you. We've got some great things going in the chat box right now, and I'll definitely get my team to follow up on those things. You know, this is the first time we put this together in this format. You know, I'm learning so much so that next year we can do this again. Hey, put your hand up. Oh, see, I'm learning. You can't put your hand up. You can, physically, you can do it. Type in the chat box if you would like me to put this on again next year. You know, has it been of value to you? I'd love to hear about that, because I'm, you know, certainly not wanting to do things that aren't scratching where people are itching. So here we are. We've got another session to go, and I'm really looking forward to it. So this morning we've had 3 amazing ladies who have just, we've had 2 amazing ladies and an amazing man. Let me just take that off the tape before Robert hears it. And what a way to start. You know, the art of storytelling is so important. And, you know, it was so good to hear Robert's vulnerability and getting us in the right place to be able to learn what it is that he had to teach through his experience and through his expertise, and being able to help us to understand more about happiness. You see, happiness is something that gets thrown around all the time. It's something that, you know, I'm either happy or I'm not. And I'm sure that you got a totally different perspective about happiness and where it comes from right now. So that was where we started. Then we went into the seductive allure of neuroscience with my good friend, Dr. Sarah McKay. And I love how she was able to just take the sometimes complex and wrongly used, if I can say that as strongly as that, and put it into a model that helps us to be able to utilize that knowledge and combine it with the other areas of our knowledge with that, you know, that bottom up, top down, outside in model that she's got. So then to wrap up this session, we had the amazing Deborah Thurley, who, as I said, had the most calming voice and brought us into a state to learn, and then just gave us some practicals. You know, when we're feeling like this, here's something that you can do: pause and reset. And I know that each of us are going away now with that strategy and an understanding of not just the strategy. You know, sometimes people will teach you stuff, just do this. And for me, look, I'm a type of person that will try things out. However, when we can illuminate why that works, it makes it so much easier to go, yeah, I can see why I would do that. And then we'll have a greater, you know, opportunity to go and implement what we've been taught. So I am a happy man, very happy to see so many people getting so much out of this. I'm just going to have, some questions here. Let's see, people are wanting to do it next year. They're saying yes, of course, yes, please. Fantastic. Robert's asking, is it recorded, as I have not heard the others? Yes, so you can go, when we sent the links, and when I say we, the system sent these links out, you can go back to those links of the sessions that you didn't attend, and you can watch the recordings in the YouTube channel. By the way, when you're there, I'd love you. We just started that YouTube channel for this. I would love you to subscribe, hit the little bell so that you get notified, because beyond this, I don't want it just to be another summit next year. You know, I want this to be a community that we can build around emotional intelligence, around positive psychology, around applied neuroscience, where people can come, whether they're just like you and I, and we just want to learn stuff for ourselves, or whether they are people that are in human resources or business leadership or coaching or training or whatever, to be able to get more knowledge on how they can serve their clients. I want to continue. I'm going to get some more people. I'm going to do some interviews, and I'm going to ask them some questions that are going to, you know, go in that YouTube channel so that you can avail yourself of those as free resources. And that gives me the ability then to put some stuff in the show notes and, you know, some resources and those sort of things. So make sure that you help us out by letting people know about that. If you're posting anything out on social media, please use the hashtags EI Summit 2020 and hashtag People Builders, and that will help people. Coming up in our next session, just before we wrap this one up, which is at 5 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so Sydney time. Check when that is for you. And we're going to start off with a lady originally from India, who has now moved with her family to Adelaide here in Australia. Really great friends with ours, and she she does coaching for the UN. She's just an amazing person who lives to serve others. Her name is Sandra Calhando, and she's going to help us to go from those mind traps that we have and shift those and go from a mindset to a mind flex. Then I'm really excited to bring together two people from my team. This isn't all about me. I've just had the vision to do it and I got it done. And people who know me know that I'm sort of that type of person. And yes, I'm the emotional intelligence, speaker and trainer of the year, all those things that people talk about. But I've got an amazing team of people who I work with, who I've been able to mentor. So I've got two ladies, one from Bangladesh, the other from India, who are, experts in their own right and great practitioners of training and coaching around emotional intelligence. And we're going to have a conversation around stress and how we can alleviate stress and how we can manage stress in a more healthy way by using some of these things that we've been talking about. So I'm really looking forward to bringing Rushdina and Sandia to you. And then we're going to finish off with a guy in the UK. His name's Alistair Schofield. He is one of my teachers in the area of applied neuroscience, and he's going to help us to understand more about the brain at work. So that's what we've still got coming up. I'm just going to check in before I go if there's any questions. Talked about the recording. Yes. Whoops, pushed the wrong button, Grant. Too many buttons here. Yes, definitely valuable. Would be great if you did it again next year, especially when speakers share knowledge we can apply to self-development and professional development. Yeah, and that was my brief. We didn't know who was going to show up, so I wanted to make it that it wasn't just for anyone in particular, that everyone, no matter what, whether you came for personal or professional development, you took something away. So that is awesome feedback. Thank you very much. Deborah's popped in to say thank you all. I really appreciate you, Deborah. Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to give us all an early mark. We finished 5 minutes early. So unless you've got any questions that need answering, we're back again this afternoon at 5 p.m. So I'm just going to have a look here. No one's popping anything else in, which is great. I really appreciate you being here. Share this with your friends. Tell them to come along to the last session. They'll get access to the other resources again. Just send them to www.emotionalintelligencesummit.online. Make sure they put the W's there. For some reason, the internet's playing silly games right now. Or to peoplebuilders.com.au, and up the top there's a place where they can click as well. So no questions, people just saying thank you. I really appreciate you all, and that'll do. I shall see you again in 6 hours